Chapter 841. Spring had arrived. The ice and snow had melted, revealing the green grassland. The grassland was full of life. At the same time, it also represented the beginning of the war. Without the shackles of snow, the grazing season was about to arrive. Resources became the most important thing in everyone's eyes. How to have a better performance and change in the new year became a problem that everyone had to consider. As the commander of the Wangquan Metropolitan Department, Shi Wanshan's days in the Xian Mansion had been very comfortable recently. Unlike Sun Hong, who faced the wall as leader, Yes Hen, and had a lot of pressure, the Xian Mansion, which bordered the mercenary forces, had good politics and people. The hearts of the soldiers and the people were very stable. Not only that, but the memorial sent to the capital during the new year also indicated that the imperial court had allocated 500,000 taels of silver, allowing them to build 50,000 new soldiers. With money, it was easy to do things. Shi Wanshan's ambition grew. He only had 20,000 soldiers now. If he could have 50,000 more, his strength would increase by more than one level. Since the imperial court had agreed, he immediately took action. First, he recruited soldiers in the Xian Mansion. Soon, 30,000 new soldiers were in place. However, he was still not satisfied. In his opinion, the best source of soldiers was the Mongols. Not only were their bodies stronger than the Han people, their equestrian skills were better, and the most important advantage was that there was no need to worry about using these people. Even if they died on the battlefield, the compensation given would be very low. Most people could even not give it at all. He had sent people to inquire, and found that many Mongol soldiers had been recruited in the beginning city. Among them, there were Wala soldiers, Tatar soldiers, Mongol soldiers, and Nuzan soldiers. Moreover, the scouts he sent out to inquire reported that the number of soldiers in the beginning city was unimaginable. Countless people cried and shouted that they wanted to join the mercenary army, but they had no way to do so. This news greatly boosted Shi Wanshan's spirit. He saw an example and decided to follow suit and use the same method of recruitment. The master of the beginning city was just a loyal duke appointed by Baiming. Then, if he recruited soldiers in the name of Baiming, wouldn't he be more popular? Thus, at the beginning of spring, there was an additional recruitment office under the city of Tulu, responsible for welcoming the warriors and men of the grasslands. The idea was beautiful, but the reality was often cruel. The recruitment office had been set up for nearly a month, but the number of Mongolians who had actually signed up for the army was few and far between. All in all, there were no more than 50 people, and most of them were weak men. It was impossible for Shi Wanshan to see the recruitment office filled to the brim with people fighting to enlist. Shi Wanshan was a smart person. He quickly found the reason. Only then did he realize that the reason why the beginning city could easily recruit soldiers was because of the reputation of the war god of loyalty. The mercenaries had relied on their fists to forcefully conquer a piece of the world and become known to the world. After figuring this out, he naturally wouldn't be convinced. He quickly got his two deputies, Ancient River and Ning Wenfeng, to discuss the matter of sending troops to Mount Saihan. As a part of the Tatars, Mount Saihan was placed here by the great Khan Tuachuo Buhua to block the path of the great Ming dynasty. However, this huge rock gradually lost its effect after the sudden appearance of the beginning city and the capture of Tulu city. Shi Wanshan didn't know why the Duke of Loyalty didn't take action to remove this nail. However, even if the Duke of Loyalty didn't do it, it didn't mean that he would. Especially now that Tulu city had fallen into the hands of Baiming, the threat of this place was already close at hand. By sending troops to Mount Saihan, they could make a name for themselves and let the warriors of the grasslands know that there was not only the beginning city, but also Baiming's army. In addition, by occupying this place, it was equivalent to having one more front station for Baiming to send troops to intervene in the grasslands in the future. Do we need to report this matter to the beginning city? Ning Wenfeng, who was the commander and was also Shi Wanshan's think tank military advisor, asked. No need. With our strength, we can take down Mount Saihan by ourselves. Shi Wanshan shook his head. In his opinion, perhaps this action wouldn't make the Duke of Loyalty happy. Once he was notified, what if he didn't agree? What should he do then? Seeing that Shi Wanshan had made up his mind, the commander, Ancient River, who was sitting at the side, stood up and said, "All right, since that's the case, I'll lead the troops to fight." 3 days later, 15,000 Baiming soldiers set off from Tulu City toward Mount Saihan, which was 400 miles away. Among them, 5,000 were new recruits. On the city wall, as the guarding eunuch Deng Chong watched as Ancient River, who was dressed in armor, led the troops away, he spoke in a hoarse voice, "Commander Sure, I can fill in the memorials for the expedition later, but we must win this battle. Otherwise, I'm afraid that there will be people in the imperial court who will cause trouble for us." "Haha, don't worry, eunuch Deng. With General Ancient River leading the troops, there will only be 8,000 enemies on Mount Saihan. There won't be any mistakes." Shi Wanshan looked confident. From all the information he had gathered, this battle wasn't going to be difficult. However, after 5 days, a letter requesting reinforcements was sent back to Commander Shi in Tulu City. The letter was personally written by General Ancient River. When he arrived at the foot of the mountain, he prepared to attack the city. However, on the 3rd day, when the army launched their attack, they were blocked at the Black Stone Slope. Relying on the advantageous terrain, the Tatar army continuously counterattacked. After charging again and again, 4,000 soldiers died in battle, but they still didn't achieve any results. Not only that, but the 5,000 new recruits were also heard by the army. No matter what orders were given, they weren't willing to charge together with the old soldiers. Seeing that there were only 6,000 men left, Ancient River had no choice but to ask for reinforcements. In the past, all the information said that the Mongol army was useless. When faced with the attacks of the mercenaries, they were often quickly defeated and showed signs of defeat. This made Shi Wanshan think that the Mongol cavalry had also fallen, and that their combat strength was not as good as before. However, now that they had actually fought, he knew that it wasn't that the Mongol army had fallen back, but that the mercenaries were too strong. However, since things had come to this, there was no turning back. At this moment, there was no possibility of stopping and retreating. If he really did that, the morale of the army would definitely be shaken, and the recruitment of new soldiers would naturally be unable to continue. "Send the troops. This time, I will personally take action. I will lead 5,000 soldiers." Shi Wanshan decisively made a decision. He ordered Ning Wenfeng and eunuch Deng Chong to stay behind in Tulu City. He personally led 5,000 old soldiers to Mount Saihan. In the beginning city, Yang Chendong had already received the news the moment the army in Tulu City began to mobilize. Shi Wanshan, who thought that he was smart, closed the 4 gates and didn't allow anyone to leave the city. However, he didn't know that there was something called a telegram. People didn't need to leave the city to send the news to very far places. After receiving the news, Yang Chendong quickly saw through Shi Wanshan's motive. To the south was the territory of Datong Prefecture. There was an old rival of Baiming Yeshen. If they begged him not to harass them, they would be very lucky. Then they would definitely not find trouble with him. The beginning city was very powerful, and it wasn't something that Shi Wanshan could easily touch. After thinking about it, it seemed that there was only Mount Saihan left. Speaking of Mount Saihan, they had also fought with the mercenaries before. They had launched a sneak attack, but they didn't gain any advantage. Yang Chendong originally wanted to get rid of them as soon as possible. However, after the scout reported the terrain there, he stopped this plan. Now was the time to develop the beginning city. It was just a poor mountain. It didn't matter whether they occupied it or not. Even if they occupied it, they still had to send people to guard it. Without that place, it meant that there was no buffer between him and Baiming. Yang Chendong, who had always looked at the big picture, let them go. He didn't expect Shi Wanshan to have designs on them. Well, since he wanted to hit a rock, he might as well do it. When the time came, both sides would suffer. Wouldn't that be more beneficial to him? After receiving the news, Yang Chendong didn't take this matter seriously. In fact, he had already thought about the outcome. On this day, he was attending the opening ceremony of the newly built Yang Family Academy in the beginning city. After a few months of hard work, an academy with a height of 4 stories and an area of more than 100 acres was built. Yang Chendong was the president, and Wang Si was the first vice president. They were in charge of the main matters of the academy. The academy opened up the main subjects such as mathematics, language, physics, science, medicine, and other subjects. There were also other subjects such as sports, music, art, and even foreign language classes. Although they were only teaching some Mongolian, Russian, Japanese, and Korean for now. However, it wouldn't be long before some Western languages would be developed. At that time, there would be a group of foreign language talents here. This would play a great role in future dealings with countries around the world, and even in occupying them. Because of Yang Chendong's participation, the ceremony became very lively. The 500 students of the academy for the first time were all present. And this was only the first batch. In the future, there would be more people who would enter to learn. After learning, they would be used by Wuxia. Just after the ceremony was completed, and under the accompaniment of Wang Si, the vice president, he was walking around the academy. The commander of the reconnaissance battalion, Su Yinsheng, appeared and gestured to Beta Persei from afar. Soon after, an urgent report was sent to Yang Chendong. Glancing at the contents of the report, Yang Chendong's eyes paused for a moment. Then he said to Wang Si, who was accompanying him, "Dean Wang, please take care of the matters here. This young master still has something to do, so I'll go first. Tiger Army Commander, come with me." After hurriedly leaving the academy, Yang Chendong returned to the war room in the Yang residence. Tiger Ming quickly came over. The report that had just been sent was also sent to him. After reading the contents, Tiger Ming's face flashed with surprise. After thinking for a moment, he looked at Yang Chendong and said, "Young master, leave this matter to the new army." "Okay, what do you think?" Yang Chendong nodded lightly. The war naturally had to be left to the new army. Unless the situation was serious, he would only bring the Tiger Army. Chapter 842, Tatar Cavalry's Spring Hunt. Chapter 842. At this moment, Shi Wanshan had already arrived at the foot of Mount Saihan with 5,000 reinforcements. Not only that, he had already launched 2 attacks. Under the ferocious attacks of the reinforcements, they had already taken over half of the magnetite slope. The dawn of victory was right in front of them. Report. A scout on a fast horse suddenly appeared in front of the Baiming army's tent. Then the cavalryman, who was sweating profusely, jumped off his horse and knelt on the ground. "Commander, a large number of Tatar cavalrymen suddenly appeared 50 miles behind us. They are heading straight for us." "Behind us?" Shi Wanshan's face turned cold when he heard the report. His eyes were filled with disbelief. Ancient River, who was standing at the side, was also shocked. "What's going on? Are you sure it's the Tatar cavalrymen? Where did they come from? How many of them are there? We don't know where they came from, but there should be around 40,000 of them." The scout raised his head and then lowered it again, reporting what he knew. "Retreat, continue scouting." When he heard that there were 40,000 enemy cavalrymen, Shi Wanshan could no longer remain calm. After the scout retreated, he glanced sideways at Gu He, who was at the side, with a strong intention to ask, "Let's retreat. Let's retreat to Tulu City first. Maybe they aren't coming for us." At this moment, Ancient River didn't have any better suggestions. He could only say this with a fluke mentality. "Okay, prepare to retreat immediately. We don't have much time left." It was only 50 miles away. The cavalrymen would arrive in the blink of an eye. It didn't matter if these people were coming for them or not. For safety's sake, it was better to avoid conflict. The Baiming army, who was still attacking fiercely, suddenly stopped attacking the mountain. Then they began to prepare to retreat. In order to speed things up, they even decided to abandon some of the less important supplies. Within an hour, 2,000 men of the vanguard were sent out. On Mount Saihan, the Baiming army suddenly stopped their fierce attacks, causing the Tatar generals Mazum and Bela to be puzzled. They were afraid that the Baiming army had a plan, so they didn't dare to act rashly. It wasn't until a gerfalcon suddenly flew over the mountain and was captured by a trainer that they learned what had happened at the foot of the mountain. "Ha ha ha ha." Mazum laughed heartily when he read the report and passed it to Bora. "Take a look, it's General Hubor. He's leading 40,000 cavalrymen towards Mount Saihan. I'm sure the Baiming army is rushing back to Tulu after hearing the news." After reading the report, Bai Le's face was also filled with excitement. General, this means that our chance has come. Does the Bai Ming army want to escape? Humph. After fighting us for so long, how can they just leave like that? Why don't we keep them busy and buy time for General Hu Bo to arrive? Then we can pincer them and wipe them out. All right. However, we still have to be careful of the mercenaries in the origin city. How about this? We'll leave 2,000 men behind and take 4,000 down the mountain. Mazam suggested. Bora nodded in agreement and led the 4,000 cavalrymen down the mountain, leaving 2,000 soldiers behind. After fighting with the Bai Ming army for several days, they had lost 2,000 men. The remaining 2,000 were their final strength. Sherwanshan didn't know that he had been targeted. He also didn't know that the Tatar army's original target was them. The 40,000 cavalrymen led by Hubo, were one of the great Khan Tuachuo Buhua's subordinates. They took advantage of the warmth of spring and the blooming of flowers to appear in the grasslands. They also had a unique name, the Spring Hunt. When spring arrived, the cavalrymen would go out to show off their strength and show off their strength. They would also show off their strength and show off what territory belonged to them. These places were sacred and could not be invaded. Otherwise, they would have to be prepared to be attacked by the cavalrymen. Unfortunately, the territory that Hubo had chosen to patrol this year was near Saihan Mountain. The appearance of the origin city and the change of Talu city had made the Tatar army feel threatened. This time, it was time for them to take back what originally belonged to them. Previously, it was mostly Wala and Bai Ming fighting. Previously, the Great Ming dynasty had attacked the Mongol tribes, and Wala had not had any major conflicts with the Great Ming dynasty. However, Yang Qindong's appearance had broken this situation. They needed to retaliate to show off their position and sovereignty. It was under such circumstances that Hubo led his 40,000 cavalrymen into the grasslands. Along the way, the scouts at the front had sent news that when the Bai Ming army was attacking Saihan Mountain, Hubo had led his army over. They wanted to start with the Bai Ming army that dared to cross the line. As the army headed down Mount Saihan, in the middle of the troops, Hubo received news that the North Ming army was making a move and wanted to retreat. A vicious look flashed across his face. You want to retreat? It's too late. Where's General Gar? I'll give you 5,000 cavalrymen. Set off first and stop the Bai Ming army from retreating to Talu city. The main army will follow soon. Understood. A Mongolian general dressed in armor cupped his fists in acknowledgement, then galloped out on his horse. Not long after, he gathered 5,000 cavalrymen and sped down Mount Saihan. Hubo did not even look at the cavalrymen. With 5,000 cavalrymen paving the way, he was confident that the Bai Ming army would not be able to escape. At this moment, while hurrying, he said to Mu Run beside him, General Mu, continue to tell me about the war god. Mu Run originally belonged to the Tatar faction. Previously, when the Mongol tribe wanted to surround the city, he saw that the situation was not good and immediately escaped. He met up with General Chiga of Guangwu town and left the region together. There were mercenaries in front and the Mongol army in the north. Under such circumstances, they were weak and could only give up on defending this place. They wanted to go to the south to find Tua to work for the Great Khan. However, they did not expect to meet Hubo, who had come for the spring hunt. Both sides gathered together, and their army reached 50,000. Since Hubo had asked, Murin naturally had to answer. Yes, General. Speaking of this war god, he is indeed very famous. In this region, everyone who hears his name trembles in fear. After he changed Arakamaki to the first city, he defeated Agar Dorji's 50,000 soldiers and the 20,000 soldiers of the Mongol tribe in the north of the desert. Not to mention the changes in Hubo's heart after hearing Muren's words, just the sudden appearance of 40,000 Mongol cavalrymen in Talu city, and according to the scouts, there were 10,000 soldiers following behind them. When Ning Wenfeng heard this, he immediately felt the severity of the situation. The Wan Quan Metropolitan Division had 20,000 old soldiers. Previously, General Ancient River had taken 10,000 with him. Later, General Sherwanshan took another 5,000. Now he only had 5,000 soldiers left. of which 2,000 were in charge of training the new soldiers in the Xian manner. He only had 3,000 old soldiers. With 3,000 Mongol cavalrymen, 40,000 cavalrymen, and 10,000 infantry, it was impossible. The best thing to do now was to defend the city, but whether or not they could do it was another matter. However, this commander Qian Shi unexpectedly made an unexpected decision. That was, he wanted to go out of the city to rescue and welcome back Commander Shi Wanshan. Perhaps in other people's eyes, once something happened to the commander and commander comrade, Qian Shi would be able to smoothly take over the position. However, in the eyes of the smart Ning Wenfeng, this was not the case. If it was peacetime, he might use his brain. However, with the Mongol army at the border, he would not use his brain. If he wanted to stabilize the situation, the Wanquan Metropolitan Division and the Xian Manor could not do without Shi Wanshan. After making the decision to go out of the city, Ning Wenfeng only left behind 1,000 old soldiers to defend the city. At the same time, he sent someone to inform Deng Chong to send another 1,000 old soldiers and 10,000 new soldiers to defend Tala City. Then he opened the city gates and left. The situation was very critical. Shi Wanshan, who had left behind a lot of supplies, wanted to immediately retreat to Tala City. At that time, he would still have a chance to defend the city. He moved quickly, but the Mongol army was not slow either. Soon, he received news that the 2,000 cavalrymen in the vanguard had been defeated and were retreating. The scouts said that the Mongol army's General Gaur had defeated our vanguard with 5,000 cavalrymen, and is on his way here. There's even worse news. Behind us, General Mazam of Mount Saihan is also chasing us with 4,000 cavalrymen. What should we do? Guhi asked Gu Wanshan anxiously. Clearly, the current situation was far worse than they had imagined. Let's go. Guhi said anxiously. Kill. Carve out a path of blood. Let's return to Tala City before the enemy completely encircles us. Perhaps at this time, Wenfeng has already brought people over to us. Shi Wanshan replied after a short moment of silence. General Ning? Ancient River's eyes were filled with doubt. There's no doubt about it. Wenfeng sees the big picture. He knows the importance of the two of us at this time. If something happens to us, he won't be able to defend Tala City alone. He might even lose Xian City. At that time, even if the Mongol army doesn't take his life, the emperor will. Shi Wanshan said firmly. It had to be said that his years in the bandit den had given him a very accurate grasp of people's hearts. Seeing Shi Wanshan's confidence, Ancient River could only choose to believe him. All right, since that's the case, what should we do next? Chapter 843. Order the army to charge forward. Then you and I will each lead 200 cavalrymen to Tulu City. Let's hope these soldiers can stall for more time. Shi Wanshan's eyes were filled with determination. For his own safety, he had made the decision to sacrifice his main army. This was equivalent to abandoning the safety of the majority of the people. This was not what a qualified general should do. But at this moment, Ancient River also knew that they had no other choice but to do this. Once they acted on their loyalty and traveled with the main force, the final result would be that even their own lives would be lost inside. Okay. After a little hesitation and struggle, Ancient River did not object and agreed to this decision. Then the two of them began to select elite soldiers to supplement the 400 people that they needed to take away. Just as the sky was about to turn dark, Shi Wanshan and Gu He each led 200 elites and set off their troops under the cover of the darkness. Not only did no one in the Baiming army notice them, even the Tatar cavalry scouts who were in charge of monitoring them did not notice them. It was also night time. The mighty new mercenary army left the first city and headed straight for Tulu City. Tulu City was the main supply point of the mercenary army. Once it was lost, there was only one way left. For the first city that needed a lot of materials, this was obviously not enough. Even if it was for themselves, the mercenary army had to do something to ensure that Tulu City would not change hands. The sky gradually darkened. Fortunately, there was still some moonlight. Once they got used to the darkness, they could see the road ahead even if they did not use a torch. It was just that their vision was blocked and they could not see too far. Since they could see the road ahead, Tiger's man ordered the soldiers not to use torches. At the same time, he also gave the reconnaissance battalion commander Dingshan a death order to increase the scope of the reconnaissance. Once they found any Tatar scouts, they had to be resolutely eliminated to ensure the concealment of the army. Hu Mang also knew that once the sun rose, he wouldn't be able to hide his whereabouts even if he wanted to. All he wanted was to have a peaceful night, and not be discovered by the enemy during the night. Dingshan, who had received the death order, set out. Although there were only 500 scouts in the reconnaissance battalion, every one of them was an elite in the army. Whether it was horsemanship or archery, they were all 1 in a million talents. It was just a night's covert march, so he was confident that he could succeed. The mercenaries didn't move slowly in the dark. After all, they had already familiarized themselves with the environment and terrain of this area. Usually there were related exercises, and one of them was to explore this area at night. Now it was just turning the exercise into a real battle, and it was not difficult. Vice Commander, at this speed, we will be able to cover half the distance by tomorrow morning. At that time, we will be able to form a triangle with the Northern Ming army to contain the sudden appearance of the Tatar army. As Hu Mang rode forward, he did not forget to look at Shi Bi and ask this question. It could be said to be a miracle in the mercenary army. He was just a surrendered general who had not made any contributions to the army. Yet he had suddenly become a regiment commander. At that time, Hu knew how many people were envious, jealous, and dissatisfied. But soon, this person used only 2,000 soldiers to force Agador, who had 15,000 soldiers, into Guangwu town. Everyone was in an uproar. Only now did they know that the 6th young master had great foresight and ability. Soon a new army was established, and Shibi was able to get a free ride. He jumped from a regiment commander to a vice commander. This scene made some of the senior officers even more dissatisfied. But considering that this was the decision of the 6th young master, no one dared to say anything. Compared to the dissatisfaction of the others, Tiger's man did not show any emotion. He even thought that it was a good thing that Shibi could be his vice commander. It was because he knew that Shibi was very intelligent, and even the 6th young master praised some of his ideas. So whenever something happened in the army, he would always listen to Shibi's opinion. Yes, Commander. Our sudden appearance will definitely give the Tatar army a surprise. At that time, they will not be able to attack Tulu City. But at the same time, the pressure on us will not be small. We need to be mentally prepared. Shibi had been analyzing the situation on the battlefield the entire time. Although he was once a member of the Tatar army, he was now entrusted with an important task by Yang Chendong. All he thought about was how to repay this kindness. The so-called Tatar army, in his eyes, did not have any friendship. They were only enemies and opponents. Yes, we need to be mentally prepared. But fortunately, we still have 6 battalions of musketeers. As long as we do not take the initiative to attack, whoever wants to attack us will not be able to gain any advantage. Tiger's man nodded. Of course, he knew how much pressure it would be to defend Invincible City against 50,000 enemies by himself. However, he was not afraid. The new army was trained by him. Since the establishment of the army until now, they had undergone more than a month of hard training. Their combat strength had already reached the standard that he had expected. Although they could not be said to be very strong, there should not be any problems if it was just defense. You are right, Army Commander. But the musketeers can only defend against enemies in front. What if enemies appear behind us? Shibi first nodded in agreement, then raised his own doubts. Vice Commander, are you talking about the enemies on Saihan Mountain? Didn't the scouts report that there are only 2,000 people left on the mountain? What kind of situation have they become? Tiger's man's face showed a trace of confusion and disapproval after hearing this. In his opinion, it was only 2,000 enemies. They would not even dare to go down the mountain. How could they be causing trouble? But no matter what, this is a kind of threat. The 6th young master once said that the best way to deal with threats is to eliminate them and not let them exist between heaven and earth. Shibi's voice carried a hint of persistence at this moment. Since he was appointed as the vice commander, he had to plan for other things while he was in the position. Shibi even knew that the reason why he was promoted so quickly, and even reached the rank of senior colonel, surpassing many seniors who had joined the mercenary army before him, was because the sixth young master wanted him to assist Tiger's man and help him fill in the gaps. Since he had already set his position, Shibi naturally knew when to persevere and when he only needed to give some pointers. Just like now, he could not back down. Otherwise, even if the sixth young master knew about it, he would be disappointed in him. With Shibi's persistence, Tiger's man's expression also became serious. He had followed Yang Chendong for so many years. How could he not know what the young master was thinking? Seeing that Shibi was not as obedient as he usually was, he asked, "Then, what do you think, Vice Commander? Take him out. If we do it well, we can even deal a heavy blow to the enemy reinforcements. Although we can't achieve a great victory, every enemy we kill will reduce some of the pressure on us in the future." Shibi immediately revealed his plan. It included a night attack on Mt. Saihan, setting a trap, and waiting for the enemy reinforcements to arrive to deal a heavy blow to them, and so on. Tiger's man listened attentively to this battle plan, and nodded in agreement from time to time. When Shibi closed his mouth, his heart was filled with a myriad of emotions. The vice commander that the young master assigned to him was truly a talent, a great talent. If they did as he said, it could indeed solve a lot of problems. Seeing that Shibi was so confident, Tiger's man knew that this battle had to be fought. He immediately said, "All right, we'll do as Vice Commander says. Take a look and decide which troops to send to carry out these missions." Since Tiger Edge cooperated so enthusiastically, he didn't dare to be careless. He proposed his own ideas in a suggestion manner. What followed was naturally approved by Tiger's man. Then the army continued to move forward. However, as they moved forward, groups of soldiers separated from the army and began to move in another direction. The sky was getting darker and darker. It would be midnight in 2 hours. Gaul's 5,000 cavalrymen and Mazam's 4,000 cavalrymen launched a night attack on the Baiming army's main force in a pincer attack. The iron hooves of the warhorses trampled on the ground. Amidst the rumbling, they charged ferociously again and again. Faced with a pincer attack from two sides, the Baiming army, which was mostly made up of new soldiers, fell into chaos. When the Kiliarchs wanted to ask for instructions on what to do next, they realized that the commander-in-chief and the commander-in-chief were nowhere to be found. With the battle on the horizon and the commander missing, the already chaotic Baiming army became even more chaotic. Faced with the charge of the Tatar cavalry, they scattered like birds and beasts, unable to put up any resistance. Countless Baiming army soldiers were killed by the Tatar army. Countless Baiming army soldiers had no choice but to throw down their weapons and kneel down to beg for their lives. Ha ha! Mazam, who had killed to his heart's content, couldn't help but laugh proudly when he saw tens of thousands of Baiming army soldiers being wiped out. He had done a great service in this battle. When he saw Hubo, he would probably be rewarded. However, his laughter did not last long. The flames that appeared on Mount Saihan not far away attracted his attention. Vice Commander Bella had appeared beside him at some point and said with a panicked expression, "General, someone attacked Mount Saihan. It should be the work of mercenaries." Ayaya. Mazam thought that he had done a great service, but he did not expect his base to be destroyed. At this moment, Mazam was furious. "Men, immediately return to Mount Saihan. No matter what, we can't let the mercenaries succeed in their scheme." Mazam wanted to go back in person, but he was stopped by Plato in the end. "General, you can't do this out of loyalty. We've just won a big victory here. You can't leave yet. Otherwise, won't all the credit be taken by General Gore? How about this? I'll bring reinforcements. I'll only bring 2,000 cavalry. I believe that with the terrain of our mountain, it's easy to defend and hard to attack. The mercenaries won't succeed so quickly. Wait until you see Lord Hubo, and ask for reinforcements. At that time, we'll attack from one side of the mountain and the other side of the mountain. Wouldn't it be better to achieve a great victory?" Chapter 844. By La's words made Mazam calm down. He thought that if he left now, then the great merit of destroying the Baiming army would have nothing to do with him. More importantly, even if he went back now, he he would only be able to bring back 4,000 cavalrymen. Against the powerful mercenaries, they would not be of much use. It was better to stay here and ask for reinforcements after meeting with Lord Hubo. This was the only way to solve the problem. All right, General Baila, I'll leave everything to you. However, you must be careful. Mazam listened to this suggestion. However, he did not know that this parting would be the final parting between him and Baila. Please rest assured, General. Once I return to the mountain, I will defend it to the death and wait for General to bring reinforcements. There was no time to lose. After Baila finished speaking, he ordered 2,000 cavalrymen to quickly return. Saihan Mountain was easy to defend and hard to attack, because of its geographical location. This had also made Mazam and Baila extremely confident. All of this had been proven when the Baiming army failed to take it down. However, the mercenaries were not the Baiming army. Attacking a mountain like this was a common part of their training. In addition, they had planned to launch a sneak attack. In addition, they had mobilized 2 battalions of 800 musketeers to assist them. When they launched their attack, the Tatar soldiers guarding the mountain were stunned. In the dark, their vision was limited. They did not know where the mercenaries would come from. If they wanted to see the enemy, they would have to raise their torches. However, if someone did so, it would be equivalent to revealing their position. The mercenaries would teach them a lesson in a matter of minutes. Often, the torches would be lit and extinguished very quickly. After more than 100 Tatar soldiers holding torches were killed, everyone learned their lesson and did not have any intention of revealing their position. Without any light, this created an opportunity for the mercenaries to charge up the mountain. At this moment, there were soldiers who relied on their outstanding mountaineering skills to attack the black stone slope and climb up to the peak of Saihan Mountain. The smoke signal on the mountain had been ignited. It was to inform Majamu and the others at the foot of the mountain that the situation on the mountain was very critical. If there were no reinforcements, they would not be able to hold on. On the black stone slope halfway up the mountain, Deputy Commander Shibi, who was in charge of commanding this battle, was watching the soldiers launch wave after wave of small attacks. His face was languid, as if he was not treating this battle as a real battle, but more like watching a mock competition. Lu Jua, the commander of the recruit division, saw this scene and felt very puzzled. Deputy Commander, why did you only launch a small-scale assault? Our recruit division is fully capable of launching an all-out attack and taking down Mount Saihan in one fell swoop. Don't worry. Let's make some people anxious. The slow-paced Silk Bear wasn't in a hurry at all. He just chuckled as he rode on his horse and watched the new recruits launch small attacks in rows or companies. That's right, Commander Lu. This is a good opportunity to train the soldiers through actual combat. Don't miss it. Lu Jua didn't know what Shibi was thinking, but he definitely wouldn't let go of such an opportunity to train the soldiers through actual combat. He immediately nodded solemnly and called over a few regimental commanders, instructing them to use this opportunity to train the soldiers. Once they discovered that a soldier was injured, they were to immediately withdraw and replace him with someone else. In any case, the battle wasn't that intense, so they had plenty of opportunities to do these things. Shibi wasn't in a hurry. Naturally, he was waiting for the fish to take the bait. Just as he expected, Bora led 2,000 cavalrymen and headed straight for Mount Saihan. In order to reach his destination at the fastest speed possible, he didn't even wait for news from the scouts this time. He just sent out the scouts as he flew forward. There was a place called the Creek Valley on the only way to Mount Saihan from Tulu City. During the rainy season in summer, this place would converge into a creek. However, it was usually just a ditch and wasn't very big. It was only about 1 meter deep and 3 meters wide. At this moment, there were 4 firearm battalions of the new independent division lying in ambush here. 1,600 gunmen lay prone in the creek valley, aiming their guns. Not far away, the sound of horses galloping on the ground grew closer and closer. 2 cavalry scouts quickly approached. When they were about 30 meters away, they each made a hand gesture and then disappeared to the sides. From the hand gestures, it could be seen that the enemy was already 5 miles away. The sound of horses galloping came from afar and approached. They were less than 2 miles away from the creek valley. With the faint moonlight in the sky, they could faintly see the constantly moving silhouettes in the distance. All the firearms soldiers couldn't help but slow down their breathing and relax their bodies. Bang! A flare that was as bright as day suddenly flickered in the air, instantly illuminating the land as if it was daytime. The 2,000 Tatar reinforcements also entered everyone's sight at this moment. Then a roar of fire rang out. Under the sound of gunfire, the land that had returned to night was filled with flowing light. Following that, one after another, the Tatar cavalrymen fell from their horses. Occasionally, they would even let out miserable cries. Kill! Right after the sound of gunfire rang out, countless cavalrymen suddenly appeared on both sides of the creek valley. The torches in their hands were lit one after another as they charged towards the location of the 2,000 Tatar reinforcements. After 2 rounds of shooting, the Tatar reinforcements threw down at least 500 corpses. When the gunfire finally stopped, the surrounding torches illuminated their faces. Then, waves of arrows pierced through the air and landed within the army, causing several hundred people to fall from their horses. The 3,700 cavalrymen of the 9 battalions were lying in ambush nearby. Under the lead of Division Commander Xian Honghai, they were like fierce tigers descending from a mountain, as they surrounded the already stunned Tatar cavalrymen. There were bullets from afar, bows and arrows from close range, and sharp sabers from close range. Under wave after wave of continuous attacks, the Tatar cavalrymen's formation was thrown into chaos. Under the illumination of the firearms, every cavalryman's face revealed a frightened expression. Under the protection of a few personal guards, Baile's face was ghastly pale. At this moment, he knew that he had fallen into a trap. Moreover, from the looks of it, the mercenaries should have been prepared for this and sent a large number of troops. He was impressed by the mercenaries' quick reaction. At the same time, he cursed the uselessness of his own scouts in his heart. The enemy was already right in front of his eyes. Why didn't he receive any news at all? The lack of timely information ultimately led to the defeat of this battle. The 2,000 reinforcements only resisted for less than an hour. All of them, including General Baila, died in battle. In the end, there were only about 500 injured soldiers. Quickly clean up the battlefield. Send a battalion of people to send these injured soldiers back to Chichen City. At the same time, send someone to inform the deputy commander on the mountain that this is a great victory. They can take down Mount Saihan. Division Commander Xian Honghai rode on his warhorse and constantly gave out orders. After an hour, the general attack on Mount Saihan began. In less than an hour, the enemy was completely annihilated. Mount Saihan became one of the areas that First City expanded to the south. In the same night, the commander of Wangquan City, Shi Wanshan, and the commander of Wangquan City, Tongji Ancient River, were under the protection of 400 elite cavalrymen. They were rapidly advancing toward Tulu City. They had been running for the entire night. Seeing that the sky was starting to brighten, their whereabouts were finally discovered by the Tatar scouts. Following that, they were pursued and intercepted all the way. At this moment, it could be said that time was life. In order to break out of the encirclement and escape before the main Tatar army appeared, the 2 generals went through several attacks. The number of soldiers under their command was decreasing. After going through the 5th encirclement, there were less than 50 cavalrymen around them. Even so, the 2 generals did not intend to give up resisting. They were still fighting with all their might just to be able to return to Tulu City alive. They are over there. Surround them. Don't let them escape. Not far away, another team of 200 Tatar patrols came. When they saw the Baiming army being surrounded, they immediately rushed over with all kinds of strange cries. There were still more than 100 enemies around them. Now that another 200 enemy cavalrymen came, Shi Wanshan immediately felt the pressure increase. He waved his saber and slashed continuously. After killing another Tatar cavalryman, he wiped the blood off his face and forced a smile at Ancient River, who was not far away. Brother Ancient, it seems that we won't be able to escape. If we can't get out, then we'll just die in battle. Killing 1 is enough. Killing 2 is a win. At most, we'll be a hero again after 18 years. Ancient River also forced a smile. Then he tightened his left arm that had been stabbed. He suppressed the bleeding point and waved his left hand once again, charging toward the Tatar cavalrymen 5 meters away. At this moment, it was impossible to distinguish between generals and warriors. The heavens were very fair. They only gave each person 1 life. At this moment, if they didn't kill the enemy, they would be killed by the enemy. All schemes and strategies were useless. The saber and the curved horse kept colliding in the air, causing bursts of sparks. After a quarter of an hour, the Baiming cavalry had lost another 40 cavalrymen. Now there were only 10 people left standing, including the 2 generals. Fortunately, after a lot of hard work, they finally managed to bleed out. Without further ado, the 2 generals brought several wounded soldiers out of the encirclement and headed toward Tulu City. At this moment, as long as there was a chance, they would fight for it. Even if they died, they didn't want to die on the grasslands. Chase. The remaining 200 Tatar cavalrymen saw that the fat meat in their hands was about to fly away. How could they let it go? They all galloped wildly and chased after Sherwanshan and the others. When the distance between them was less than 100 meters, a volley of arrows would be fired. Often 1 or 2 Baiming cavalrymen would fall off their horses and die. Chapter 845. In the blink of an eye, Baiming's cavalrymen, including the 2 generals, were left with only 4 people. At this moment, their war horses also showed signs of exhaustion after a night of running. They were no longer as fast as before and became slower and slower. As a result, the relationship between the 2 sides became closer and closer. The Tatar cavalrymen were not in a hurry to shoot arrows. With such a good opportunity, they wanted to capture the enemy alive and make a great contribution. The distance between them grew closer and closer. From 100 meters to 80 meters, 50 meters, 30 meters, 20 meters, when they could even see the enemy's back clearly, a large group of cavalrymen suddenly appeared in front of them. Looking from afar, smoke and dust billowed. Seeing that the pursuers were about to arrive and the road ahead was blocked, Sherwanshan's face revealed a pained expression. Is this my death? Who would have thought that he would lose his life just because he wanted to expand his strength and take down Mount Saihan? Sherwanshan unconsciously raised the saber in his hand. At this moment he thought of cutting his own throat. Perhaps this would be a better way to die. Otherwise, if he fell into the hands of the Tatar army, he didn't know what kind of torture he would suffer. Commander, please wait. It seems to be our own army. Ancient River's eyes were sharp. He saw that the approaching cavalrymen were carrying Baiming's flag and wearing the same battle armor as them. He immediately shouted excitedly. This shout pulled Sherwanshan back from the brink of death. When he raised his head to look at the source of the shout, there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. That's right, it's our cavalrymen. Wenfeng must have come to save us. Quick! Charge over, we'll be safe once we charge over. Sometimes, a person's potential was limitless. After seeing hope, the speed of the warhorses seemed to have increased unknowingly. The distance between the 2 sides was also getting closer and closer. The pursuing Tatar cavalrymen also noticed this. Immediately, they took out the longbows that were originally on their backs and shot a volley of arrows. Guhi's luck was very bad as he was shot once again. His entire body spat out a mouthful of blood as he lay prone on the back of his horse. Fortunately, Baiming's reinforcements arrived at this moment. Ning Wenfeng, who was leading 2,000 cavalry, commanded the cavalry to return arrows to the pursuing Tatar cavalry. At the same time, he ordered people to rescue the injured General Ancient River. Then he looked at Sherwanshan, who was in a rather sorry state, and asked, Commander, are you all right? I'm fine. I'm not hurt. Let's return to the city as soon as possible. Sherwanshan let out a soft sigh. He didn't have any energy left in him as he lay down on the horse's back. Men, change the commander's horse and return to the city. Ning Wenfeng knew very well that this was not the time to reminisce about the past. Ning Wenfeng's arrival saved the lives of the 2 generals. On the way back to Tulu City, they encountered several more interceptions. Every time, he would take the initiative to send his men to meet the enemy. After losing about 500 cavalrymen several times, he finally made it to Tulu City safely. More than 2 hours after Ning Wenfeng and the others returned to the city, the main force of the Tatar cavalry had already been defeated at the foot of the city. They began to set up camp and assumed a posture of attacking the city at any time. At this moment, there were only 2,500 soldiers in Tulu city. It would be very difficult to rely on these men to defend the city. Just as Ning Wenfeng was considering whether or not to abandon the city, a scout reported that a large number of mercenaries had suddenly appeared at the northwest side of the city. They had set up camp at the side of the Tatar army, looking as if they would rush up and take a bite out of the city at any time. There's such a thing? Thinking that the mercenaries had arrived quite quickly, Ning Wenfeng immediately climbed up the city gate tower. Sure enough, he saw the 5-starred flag of the mercenaries 5 kilometers away from the city. While sighing at the mercenaries' quick reaction, he also let out a sigh of relief. Now it seemed that defending the city wasn't necessarily impossible. The Tatar army that had originally been prepared to attack the city had no choice but to rearrange their troops out of fear of the mercenaries. This gave Tulu city a chance to catch its breath. After noon, the Xian mansion's reinforcements arrived after receiving the news. Eunuch Deng Chong led 1,000 old soldiers and 10,000 new recruits. At this moment, there were only 1,000 old soldiers left in the Xian mansion, which was the minimum number they could send. But no matter what, with their arrival, Ning Wenfeng had gained some confidence. He was even more confident in defending Tulu city. In the Tatar army's tent, Hubo listened to the report of last night's battle with a terrifyingly gloomy expression. To be specific, they hadn't suffered any losses. It was true that they had lost Mount Saihan and had lost 4,000 cavalrymen, but they had also wiped out 10,000 of the Baiming army's main force. In other words, they had come out on top. However, Huboer's sudden appearance should have been able to catch the Baiming army and the mercenaries off guard. Now it seemed that while it had some effect, it wasn't enough. In the end, it was all because the mercenaries had interfered. This made Hubo even angrier at the mercenaries than at the Baiming army. Mazam, Gore, I'll give you 3,000 cavalrymen to attack the mercenaries. I want to see how strong they are. General Chiga, I'll give you 5,000 infantrymen. Prepare to take down Tulu city. I want to massacre the city and bury the 4,000 soldiers from last night. Hubo furiously gave out 2 orders. Once the order was given, Mazam and the other 2 who were named were about to leave the tent. However, General Murun, who hadn't been named, suddenly stood up. General, you can't do this. With the mercenaries' strength, 6,000 cavalrymen won't be able to break through. If we send them out, we'll suffer even greater losses. Murun had told Hubo about the mercenaries' strength on the way here. He had thought that both sides would listen to his advice and be more careful when facing the mercenaries in the future. However, it seemed that they hadn't taken his advice seriously. Do not shake the soldiers' morale. Generals, why aren't you going to do as I say? Hubo was clearly furious. He glared at Murun, as if saying that he would kill him if he dared to shake the soldiers' morale. In the end, Murun didn't dare to say anything and stepped back. Since the general had given his orders and was angry, the others naturally didn't dare to disobey. 6,000 cavalrymen and 5,000 infantrymen left the camp and charged towards the north and west. CB had already arrived outside Tulu city from Saihan Mountain and was warmly welcomed by Tiger's Mane. Haha, Deputy Commander, you've worked hard. The travel-worn CB hurriedly took a few steps forward and arrived in front of Humang. He respectfully saluted. Commander, you're the one who's working hard. I'm just following your orders. Speaking of which, if they won the battle, most of the credit should go to the commander. CB's attitude was very good. Since he knew that he couldn't win, he might as well take a step back and keep a low profile. Whether it was Tiger's Mane or the 6th young master, they all knew what he was doing. As expected, Tiger's Mane chuckled when he heard CB's words. In truth, with his position, he didn't care about military merits. The 6th young master trusted him more than anything else. However, CB's actions were also to show his authority, so he naturally wouldn't refuse. In return, he enthusiastically pulled CB's hand and led him to the central tent. The other captains of the other teams followed closely behind him. Previously, it was the battle at Guangwu town. Now it was the battle at Saihan Mountain. They no longer felt jealous of this newly promoted deputy commander. After all, people would only compare themselves to people of similar strength. However, for someone who was already far ahead of them, it was better to put away such thoughts. The officers of the new army strode into the tent. The moment they entered, they saw a sand table that had been set up at the last minute. It recorded the comparison of the military strength of both sides and the way they were arranged. Tiger's Mane learned this from Yang Qindong. He wasn't the only one who had such a simple sand table in every regiment commander's tent. It was to help them understand the situation on the battlefield better. Everyone followed Tiger's Mane to the sand table. After looking at it, they started to think seriously. About 7 minutes later, he smiled and nodded. The commander's arrangement is already the best. Saying these words proved that he had no other opinions. Tiger's Mane chuckled and said, "Deputy Commander, you must have had a hard journey. Why don't you go back to the tent and have a good rest?" "There's no need. I've already rested on my horse on the way here." CB shook his head and refused. It was true that he had made a military contribution, but this didn't mean that he had any special privileges. Especially in front of Tiger's Mane, he was a junior. "Fine. Since Deputy Commander is concerned about military affairs, then let's discuss how to attack the Tatar army." Tiger's Mane nodded. He was just being polite. Now that the small talk was over, it was time to talk about business. Without waiting for the officers to express their opinions on the current situation, the Scout Battalion Commander Ding Shan had already entered the tent. He saluted Tiger's Mane and said, "Commander, the Tatar army has moved. There are 3,000 cavalry coming towards our camp from the left and right." "You're so petty." When he heard that there were only 6,000 cavalry coming, Tiger's Mane didn't panic at all. Instead, he was somewhat dissatisfied. It was clear that he felt that the Tatar army didn't send enough cavalry. Hearing this, the other officers also burst into laughter. After laughing, Tiger's Mane put away his casual attitude, and his expression became more serious. The sixth young master once said that we have to pay attention to the enemy in terms of tactics and look down on the enemy in terms of strategy. Therefore, even if we have the confidence that we will win, we can't be arrogant and we can't be careless. Yes. When the officers heard that it was the sixth young master's order, they all replied seriously. "Good. Since the enemy is coming, of course we have to beat them back." "Deputy Commander, do you have any thoughts?" Tiger's Mane asked out of respect. "No. We will listen to Commander's orders." Other than that, there was nothing else to say. Last night when they were marching, he had said all his thoughts and Tiger's Mane had also agreed. Now they just had to follow the plan. Chapter 846. "Very well, since that's the case, let's proceed according to the plan." Tiger's Mane nodded. Following this, he gave out a series of orders, and the officers who were called stood at attention. The other officers who were not called also earnestly studied. For them, as the mercenary army continued to expand, the number of soldiers they could lead would only increase. The military ranks on their shoulders would also increase, and the number of pentagonal beans would also increase. Learning more about the battle strategy of the Bright Tiger Army commander would naturally be beneficial for their future development. On the battlefield, Gaylor and Mazam each led 3,000 cavalrymen towards the mercenary camp. Although Hubo had rejected Mu Ren's suggestion to fight cautiously, the two generals knew that the mercenary army was not to be trifled with. This time, he had to be extremely careful in order to make an enemy out of him. In actuality, from the fact that they had only sent 3,000 cavalrymen each, it was clear that they were testing the mercenary army. Otherwise, Hubo would have sent at least 10,000 cavalrymen. Because it was just a test, the two generals did not charge forward. Instead, they slowly approached, wanting to see how the mercenary army would react to their arrival. Under their watchful eyes, the mercenary camp quickly reacted. Groups of mighty and majestic cavalrymen appeared and walked out of the camp in an endless stream. It was too much for the eyes to take in, and it felt like there was no end to them. However, this feeling quickly disappeared because the cavalrymen had already blocked their vision, making it impossible for the two generals to see what was going on within the mercenary army. General Gaylor lightly sighed. The mercenary army's tricks made him feel a sense of helplessness. On the other hand, Mazam glared at the mercenary army with a look of hatred. It was because of the mercenary army's shameless sneak attack last night that not only had he lost his base at Mount Sihon, but his assets had also been stolen. Even his deputy general Bora had died. Because of this, he was furious, and he wanted to deal a heavy blow to the mercenary army to take revenge for his brothers and vent his anger. As they advanced, the distance between the two sides became closer and closer. When they were 4 li away, they were already within range of the cavalrymen. However, the mercenary army was still in formation, and did not seem to have any intention of charging. Humph, it's just a bluff. Seeing that the mercenaries were not moving at all, neither charging forward nor retreating, Mazam, who was furious, decided to charge forward and try it out. He wanted to see how strong the other party was. Men attack. Once the order was given, the 3,000 Tatar cavalrymen moved. Their horses galloped and kicked up clouds of dust on the ground as they charged toward the mercenary cavalrymen. When Gore saw that Majamu had taken the initiative to charge without even greeting anyone, his eyes darkened. At this moment, a deputy general at the side asked, "General, should we also launch an attack together?" "Let's wait and see," Gore said calmly. This was his first time fighting with the mercenaries, and he wanted to learn more about them. The left wing did not move. Only Mazam's army rushed out. However, he did not seem to be afraid. There was only the word kill in his eyes. Although there were quite a number of cavalrymen, there was no fear in his eyes. On the battlefield, one could win against many with a few. Perhaps it would happen to him one day. The Tatar cavalrymen were getting closer and closer. Soon, the distance between them was reduced from 4 li to 2 li. At such a distance, the cavalrymen should charge. Otherwise, there would not be enough space for them to display their speed. Once they collided, they would be at a disadvantage. Everyone understood this logic, but the mercenaries acted as if they didn't. The cavalrymen remained motionless on their horses. It was as if they weren't facing 3,000 enemy cavalrymen who could kill, or 3,000 sheep who posed no threat at all. Kill. Seeing that the distance between them was close to 2 li and was still shrinking, Mazam's eyes flashed with joy. The mercenaries were so arrogant that they did not intend to charge. In this way, the advantage would be in his hands. Once he got close to the enemy cavalry, he would use the momentum to ram them. At that time, his 3,000 cavalrymen would be able to unleash several times their strength. It was not impossible for them to win. Are they crazy? Men, charge with me. On the other side, Gower saw everything clearly with his eyes. Seeing that the mercenaries were still not moving at such a distance, he was truly shocked. At such a distance, if they did not charge, they would not have a chance to charge. Could it be that the powerful mercenaries were just legends? In reality, they were just infantrymen riding war horses? Unable to understand, Gower decided not to think about it anymore. After all, facing an enemy cavalry that did not know how to charge, this was a heaven-sent opportunity. He could even imagine how Mazam would go on a killing spree once he joined the mercenary army. And such a great merit could not be claimed by him alone. He was bound to take a share of the pie. Gower also moved. The 3,000 cavalrymen charged, but they were only 2 li late. The moment he led his troops to charge, Wuxia, who was standing in the front row of the mercenaries, smiled. With a smile, he suddenly ordered the army to move to the left and right, leaving the center. Although he was leading recruits, there was no problem in following orders. Immediately, the army began to retreat to the left and right. As they left, the 6 brigades of musketeers behind them were exposed. Beside the musketeers was the independent division commander Xian Honghai on horseback. Seeing that his field of vision had become very wide, his originally raised saber also dropped. He shouted, "Fire!" At the front of the battlefield, Mazam was already less than a li away from the mercenaries. He could even see the pale and frightened faces of the mercenaries. At this moment, his heart was extremely carefree. He urged his horse to speed up. His saber could not help but taste blood. Right at this time, the situation on the battlefield suddenly changed. Those frightened mercenaries separated to the sides, revealing the 3,000 mercenaries behind them. Following a loud roar, several thousand bullets flew through the air, passing through the air and arriving in front of them. The distance of 1 li, 500 meters, was completely within the range of the Type 81 assault rifles. Under the explosive sounds of gunfire, bullets flew out from the barrel like meteors flying through the sky. They drilled into the bodies of the Tatar cavalrymen who were brandishing their sabers, drawing out waves of blood. Mazum, who was charging at the very front, did not avoid this rain of bullets either. One of the bullets landed on his chest. The instant that fatal bullet entered his body, Mazum, who was still shouting and charging forward, was stunned. His saber dropped, and his entire body slid down the back of his horse like a boneless viper. Then he fell from the horse, landing on the ground, bringing with him waves of dust. Even when he died, his body still charged towards the mercenaries' camp, showing his determination to avenge his humiliation with blood. The general died on the battlefield. The omnipresent bullets ran amok among the armored cavalry. One after another, the Tatar cavalrymen were shot and fell off their horses. One after another, the Tatar cavalrymen lost their lives while still shouting to charge. All of this happened too fast, so fast that many people could not react in time. As the cavalrymen at the very front fell off their horses and died one by one, the Tatar cavalrymen behind them finally felt fear. They did not even have the chance to fight with the enemy, and were about to be shot to death. No one wanted to see this kind of scene, and no one was willing to encounter it. Quick, quick, retreat, retreat. They knew that rushing forward would only lead to their own deaths. More and more Tatar cavalrymen reined in their horses, turned their horses around, and began to run back the way they came. There were some brave warriors among these Tatar cavalrymen. They were not as afraid of death as ordinary people, but this kind of unequal slaughter, this kind of aggrieved death, was definitely not what they wanted in their hearts. So at this moment, they would rather be a coward and turn around to escape than to show their courage and charge forward half a step. As if they had expected them to do this, the cavalry of the recruit division at the front once again opened up a path. The head of the light cavalry regiment, Ma Xiangshan, shouted, "Comrades, charge with me!" The light cavalry regiment moved. The biggest change in the new army was that they had a heavy cavalry regiment and a light cavalry regiment. Like the name, heavy cavalry was a full body armor, and focused on the art of opening and closing. They were like a flood of steel rushing into the enemy formation to kill the enemy. The light cavalry was a light military uniform, focused on flexibility and speed. They did not have much other equipment on them except for the necessary sabers and crossbows. What they wanted was to use the lightest equipment to chase down the enemy cavalry with the fastest speed. When the light cavalry regiment moved, it represented the start of the chase. After Ma Xiangshan's shout, countless light cavalry flew out like arrows, heading straight into the distance. As they galloped, the crossbows in their hands were not idle. Arrow after arrow shot out into the air, chasing and killing the defeated enemy cavalry at the same time. The sudden sound of the muskets and the sudden attack of the light cavalry made Gao Er's 3,000 cavalrymen suffer. They originally thought that when they were 1 li away, the cavalrymen would be able to display their strongest fighting strength. They never thought that there would be so many dangers behind the mercenary cavalrymen. Time after time, they had to move aside, giving them different experiences. First, he was struck dumb by the muskets. By the time he managed to turn his horse around in time, the enemy cavalry behind him quickly caught up with him. When the arrows got close to him, he could only watch as the soldiers he brought with him were shot by the arrows and fell to the ground. His heart was bleeding, but there was nothing he could do. Chapter 847. Underestimating the enemy was not scary. What was scary was that his cavalry had been beaten into a pulp and had lost their will to fight. With such an iron cavalry, it would be difficult to calm them down and turn back to fight. They could only rush toward the Tatar camp and hope that the enemy would not chase too hard. As expected, the light cavalry did not chase too far and stopped after 6 miles. Ahead of them was the Tatar camp, and the enemy could send their cavalry to counterattack at any moment. Although they were light cavalry and were not afraid of being caught, there was no point in fighting. The light cavalry retreated and kept their guns. This probing mission ended in a huge victory for the mercenaries. Based on the results, they had killed close to 2,000 cavalry and captured 100 enemies. Not only did they lose the first battle, but even General Mazam had died on the battlefield. When this result reached Huboer's ears, he was furious. Within the tent, the table was sliced in half by a sharp cavalry knife. A roar sounded out. "Mazam, I will take revenge for you." Mazam had defended Sihon Mountain for many years, and even if he did not contribute much, he had put in a lot of effort. However, when Huboer's army appeared and was about to show off their skills, he was killed. It was truly regretful and sad. All of a sudden, the morale of the Tatar camp was low. To break this bad atmosphere, Huboer roared out once more. "Where is General Chiga? Has he not taken down Talu city?" The flames of war raged beneath Tulu. Countless cloud ladders were erected beneath the city walls, and countless arrows were fired in the air. Death was a matter of great importance to humans, but at this moment it seemed so insignificant and ordinary. When the Iron Cavalry started to probe the mercenaries, the 5,000 grassland infantry led by Chiga had launched a fierce attack on Talu city. It was said that the grassland Iron Cavalry were unparalleled in the world. Everywhere they went, locusts would sweep past, and not a single blade of grass would grow. However, what everyone didn't know was that the trained grassland infantrymen were also elites among soldiers. They existed for the purpose of sieging cities, and their instructors were generals with rich experience in sieging cities. The grassland cavalry relied on speed, while the Ming army relied on the city walls. Both sides had their advantages, and it was difficult for one side to gain the upper hand. As time passed, Ming Qingzu conquered the 5 grasslands and opened up the path of the Ming army's Iron Cavalry. After the Mongol soldiers suffered losses time and time again, they started to learn from the strengths of the Ming army to create offensive infantry. A person's greatest ability lies in learning and imitating. After Ming Qingzu passed away, the advantage of the Ming army cavalry slowly disappeared. As a result, the Mongol siege infantry grew. This time the 5,000 infantrymen had this ability. Their teachers were the captives of the Ming army who had their cities conquered. Since they were living under someone else's roof, they had no choice but to lower their heads. In order to survive, not many of them could reject the mere teaching of skills. Because of this, the Mongol army that was attacking the city was really aggressive. The moment they appeared, they beat up the Baiming army. The 3,000 new Baiming soldiers that were in charge of defending the city suffered heavy casualties. Cries of emergency continuously entered the ears of General Ning Wenfeng, who was in charge of the formation. He had no choice but to bring 1,000 old soldiers and 3,000 new soldiers to re-enter the city and stabilize the situation. On the battlefield, the biggest difference between the new soldiers and the old soldiers was the amount of battle experience. Usually, the experienced old soldiers knew what to do without orders. They could freely counterattack and attack when they should and dodge when they shouldn't. The new soldiers were different. They were like a heavy stone mill. If you pushed them, they would move. If you didn't push them, they would be as immovable as a mountain. When these new soldiers came to the battlefield, they were terrified by the aura of death on the battlefield. Without orders, how would they know what to do? When the new soldiers lost, the old soldiers went up. The new and old soldiers helped one another, and Ning Wenfeng's commanding ability was displayed. He chased back the Mongol infantry that had charged up the city walls. After a few rounds, they finally lasted until night time, and the offensive came to an end. Within the city lord's manor, the injured ancient river was still resting on the bed. Shi Wanshan, who had mostly recovered, and eunuch Deng Chong were sitting in the hall, talking to the exhausted Ning Wenfeng. Eunuch Deng, commander, the losses in this battle are too great. More than 2,000 new recruits have died, and 2,000 have been injured. If this continues, I'm afraid it will be difficult to defend the city. Why don't we retreat to the Xian mansion? The city walls there are higher, and it will be much easier to defend than Tulu city. Ning Wenfeng grumbled while probing. His eyes were filled with hope. We can't. Deng Chong was the first to speak. The two generals might not know, but when the Duke of Loyalty and Courage gave Talu city to the Great Ming, everyone in the imperial court clapped and cheered. The people of the capital also took to the streets and lit firecrackers to celebrate. Everyone took Talu city as a symbol of the rise of Baiming. How could we give it up at this moment? If we really did this, there would be no need for anyone else. Just the memorials from the imperial censors would be enough to crush us to death. Deng Chong's words made Shan, who originally wanted to say something, shut his mouth immediately. If this really was the case, Tala City could not be lost. Otherwise, their political lives would come to an end. At that time, no matter how great their ambitions were, they would be powerless to carry them out. Hold on a little longer. If we really can't do it, we'll transfer all the new soldiers from the Xian Manor. As long as we take the stance of defending to the death, no matter how fierce the Tatar army is, they will know the difficulties and retreat. Shan thought that there was still a strong mercenary army outside the city, and his heart was a lot more comforted. Ning Wenfeng was just probing, and since there was no other way, he didn't consider it. As for transferring soldiers from the Xian Manor, after a moment of hesitation, he said, perhaps this is the only way. Otherwise, the 2,000-some veterans and 5,000 new soldiers in the city won't be able to last for very long. Fine, then we'll transfer soldiers from the Xian Manor. First, we'll transfer 500 veterans and 10,000 new soldiers. Deng Chong finally made the decision. At this point, there were only 500 veterans and 10,000 new soldiers left in the Xian Manor. This would be their final strength. They had exerted great strength, suffered great losses, and gained nothing in the end. They still had to bitterly defend Tala City, to the extent that they had almost used up all the veterans. It had to be said that this time, they had really made a loss. This result left Shan and the other two speechless for a long time. They didn't even seem to have the mood to talk. In comparison, the atmosphere in the Tatar army camp was much better than it was in the afternoon. Chiga had already reported the casualties. During the attack during the day, more than 1,000 soldiers had died and more than 1,000 were injured. They only needed to rest for a night, and more than half of them could still participate the next day. In comparison, Baiming's defenders had suffered more than 4,000 casualties, which was twice the number of their own side. Everyone knew that during a siege, the attacking side would often be at a disadvantage. Generally speaking, to siege a city, one had to have at least 3 times the strength of the enemy. This time, the results were the exact opposite. The losses of the defenders were more than double that of the attackers. Even if they didn't take down the city, it was still a great victory. Hu Bo's expression was much better, and he encouraged Chiga. He said that they would continue to attack the city tomorrow and try to take down Tala City, as well as find a place for the army to settle down. Chiga naturally nodded towards his words. Compared to ordering the Baiming army to continue attacking, Hu Bo's attitude towards the mercenaries was something that Hu Bo could not grasp. Today's battle had given him a deeper understanding of the strength of the mercenaries. While he regretted not listening to Mu Ren's advice, he also decided to listen to his advice, which was to defend and not go out. They would wait until they took down Tala City and found a place to settle down before slowly making their next move. However, in order to prevent what happened during the day from happening again, Hu Bo called over another general, Hu Lin, and told him to prevent the mercenaries from sneaking into the camp before going to sleep. The truth proved that Hu Bo's worries were unnecessary. The mercenaries who had won during the day were sleeping peacefully in their own rooms. To them, the battle during the day was unavoidable, and it was a test between both sides. Even if it did not happen today, it would happen tomorrow. Once the test was over, and they knew that they were not to be messed with, the Tatar army would be much more obedient. That way, the mercenaries would be able to sleep peacefully. Of course, there were still soldiers on duty at night. It was better to be safe than sorry. As the sun rose, a new day arrived, and Tiger's Man held a meeting. The various divisions and regiment commanders all came out to request for battle. In response, Tiger's Man did not say anything, and he only laughed at the vice commander beside him. Shibi also smiled and said, "Today the army will rest and clean up the camp. If there is time, the various divisions and regiments can train on their own. They would not initiate an attack." This was the result of the discussion between Tiger's Man and Chibi last night. Now was not the time to fight one-on-one, and it was either you die or I die. Since there were 3 sides, if it was possible, It would be much better to just sit back and watch the tigers fight. Sitting back and watching the Baiming army and the Tatar army wear each other down. What was wrong with that? Shibi's words represented the intentions of the new army, and the other regiments and regiment commanders all left angrily and did their own things. Tiger's man also informed the sixth young master of his and Shibi's decision, and they just sat back and watched the situation unfold. In the Tatar army camp, the scouts spread out for 8 miles and only stopped when they saw that they were about to reach the mercenary camp. Then they attacked Tulu city with all their strength, as if they would not stop until they had taken down the city. In response, the Baiming army chose to defend the city with all their strength. Commander Shi Wanshan personally went up to the city tower and took the place of Commander Ning Wenfeng to defend the city, blocking the Tatar army's fierce attacks on the city again and again. In just one day, both sides had suffered considerable losses. Fortunately, on that night, 500 veterans and 10,000 new soldiers came to help, temporarily stabilizing the situation. Otherwise, it would have been extremely difficult to defend the city the next day. In the beginning city, Yang Chendong only glanced at the telegram sent by Tiger's man and put it aside. The new army had Tiger's man, who had gradually calmed down, and was led by Shibi, so he did not have to worry about anything. His gaze was more focused on the construction of the beginning city, and he made some very constructive suggestions. Chapter 848. First city was the first city he built on the grasslands, but it would not be the last. According to Yang Chendong's plan, he wanted to build a model here. In the future, when he built a city here, everyone could follow suit. In order to make this model as perfect as possible, he had to put in a lot of effort. Apart from the construction of first city, Yang Chendong was also fearlessly asking about the Mongol tribe in the Gobi Desert. The Mongol tribes were the biggest threat to the northwest of the beginning city. They were different from Huboer's tribe. They were originally from this place and had great survivability in this land. If they were not suppressed, they would become a huge problem sooner or later. Not to mention, now that they had a famous general like Fan Yuhai, if he did not destroy them, he would not be at ease. If he wanted to destroy someone, he did not only have to kill and cripple them, but he also had to run. As the ancient saying went, the best strategy was to attack the enemy, followed by attacking the enemy, followed by attacking the enemy. What Yang Chendong chose was the strategy of sending troops. This was also why he didn't order Khan Sud's life when he carried out the beheading policy in Wanda City, but only wanted him to injure his body. What he wanted was to create an opportunity for Fan Yuhai. Facing an injured Khan, he believed that a smart person would grasp the opportunity and know what to do. From the intelligence sent by the Security Bureau, it could be seen that Fan Yuhai did not disappoint. After the defeat in Wanda City, Fan Yuhai followed the Mongol army to the Gobi Desert Mongol tribe and settled down at the west of Inma River. The injured Sud Khagan, in order to stabilize the situation, temporarily handed over the military power to Fan Yuhai. This was to prevent the mercenaries from chasing after them. But as the days passed, the mercenaries didn't appear. While Sudra Khan heaved a sigh of relief, he became nervous at the same time. This was because he suddenly realized that the bodyguards around him had all been replaced. The people who used to follow him were also gone. Instead, they were replaced by unfamiliar faces. After asking, he found out that these people were Fan Yuhai's trusted aides. He was the one who gave the order to change the guard. Using the reason of ensuring Khan's absolute safety, on the surface, Khan was completely protected and isolated, but in reality, it was nothing more than house arrest. Fan Yuhai was an ambitious man. Yang Chendong had known this for a long time, so he gave him an opportunity. Sure enough, Fan Yuhai grabbed it and put Suda under house arrest, using him as a hostage to command his vassals. However, this was just the beginning of the house arrest. There were still too many people who did not understand. However, Yang Chendong knew in his heart that this matter would be exposed one day. Even if it was him, he had already arranged for Director Feng Liang to spread the news. It would not be long before there would be internal strife. He wanted to see how this famous general would decide. Below the city of Teru, the war was still raging. After suffering a loss in the first battle, the Tatar army and the new mercenary army seemed to have reached some kind of tacit understanding. The two sides did not fight and only faced each other. Speaking of which, both sides were afraid. The Tatar army was afraid of the muskets of the new mercenary army, and did not dare to charge rashly. The new mercenary army was afraid of the enemy's cavalry, which numbered nearly 40,000. If a real battle broke out, the muskets' power would be limited. Once the two sides fought, both sides would be injured. This was not what they wanted. It was precisely because of these misgivings that both sides settled down. As a result, the Baiming army had a hard time defending the city. When the Tatar army focused all of their energy and spearhead on Tulu city, the pressure on Sherwanshan multiplied, and he was in an abyss of suffering every day. Previously, when the Tatar army attacked the city, they only used infantry. These well-trained siege soldiers were already a headache for the Baiming army. However, when the mercenaries and the Tatar army were in a stalemate and neither side had the intention to send out troops, the Tatar cavalry also came into play. They arrived at the city walls and continuously shot arrows at the buildings, killing a large number of northern Ming recruits who did not have much combat experience. Teru, which was already in a precarious situation, was in even more danger. The number of casualties was constantly rising. If this continued, the city would not be able to hold on for much longer. Another tiring day passed. The exhausted Sherwanshan and Ning Wenfeng returned to the yamen of the city lord's mansion. They sat in the courtyard and drank tea while looking at each other without saying a word. Guardian eunuch Deng Chong had already returned to the Xian mansion. He even brought back the commander Gu Feng. He said that he was bringing the general back to recuperate, but in reality, it was just an excuse for him to avoid responsibility. As long as he wasn't in the city, once Talu city fell, this responsibility wouldn't have much to do with him. At that time, with Gu He this general, in his hands, the safety of the Xian manor would be guaranteed. What a wonderful plan. I said that we shouldn't have taken Teru. This city is extremely important, but its walls aren't that high. We're just asking for trouble. The emotionless Ning Wenfeng finally couldn't hold back any longer, and slapped the stone table in the courtyard. After several days of bitter fighting, even the most even-tempered person would have been worn in. How could Ning Wenfeng's reaction not be exactly what Sherwanshan had been thinking? But he was keenly aware that there was no way out of this situation. He had sent a messenger 800 li to the capital to ask a few officials who were on good terms with him. All of their answers were basically the same. The imperial court viewed this battle with great importance, and if they lost, an imperial edict condemning them would immediately be issued. When that time came, they would be guilty of Baiming. Sherwanshan, who had worked so hard to get to this day and had even been a bandit, naturally didn't want to lose everything. What he needed to do was think of a way to protect Teru. Suppressing his anger, Sherwanshan asked, Wenfeng, what do you think if we kill our way out and send someone to ask for reinforcements from the mercenaries? Ask for reinforcements? Ning Wenfeng raised his head and looked at the hopeful Sherwanshan. He shook his head and said, Commander, it's not that I want to discourage you, but if you were a mercenary, would you intervene at this time? This. Sherwanshan was speechless. He knew that his suggestion just now was somewhat idiotic, but he really couldn't think of a better idea. Behind them was the Xian residence, which also lacked soldiers. They might have the strength to defend the city, but they definitely didn't have the strength to send reinforcements. As for the imperial court, although he had sent several emergency letters, they had all been like stones sinking into the sea. It was obvious that the imperial court wouldn't send any reinforcements for the time being. After thinking about it, there seemed to be no other option besides the mercenaries before him. This was a method that couldn't be helped, but he hadn't expected Ning Wenfeng to reject it so quickly. Sitting across from him, Ning Wenfeng understood Sherwanshan's thoughts, but he still couldn't help but say, Commander, there's no need for this idea. Right now, the mercenaries are probably looking forward to us and the Tatar army fighting until both sides are heavily wounded. Why would they intervene at this time? But once Talu City changes hands, one of their supply routes will be cut off. Will the Loyal Guild allow this to happen? Sherwanshan still wanted to argue. So what if the supply route is cut off? Isn't there still the new Organdusi region? That was originally the Loyal Guild's backup plan. At least for this reason alone, we have to go against 40,000 elite cavalry. This is not a good deal. Ning Wenfeng shook his head. With such an attitude, such a decisive answer, Shi Wanshan was speechless. Perhaps he also had such thoughts in his heart, otherwise he would have sent someone to deliver a letter to the mercenaries. However, at the moment, he really couldn't find a solution other than this method. With a sigh, Shi Wanshan closed his mouth again. Only when he was drinking tea would he suddenly open his mouth, as if he had a grudge against the teacup and the tea leaves. Silence. Another silence, representing the bitterness and helplessness in the hearts of the two generals. At this moment, a guard outside the door walked in and half knelt on the ground. "Sir, there is a person outside the residence who calls himself the Loyal Guild's messenger asking for an audience." The Loyal Guild's messenger? When they heard the voice, the eyes of the two men who were originally dispirited lit up. Shi Wanshan even opened his mouth abruptly after a breath of time. "Please, please." If it weren't for his own status, Shi Wanshan would have already stood up to greet him. But even if he didn't do so, the two words "please" from his mouth were enough to express his excitement. The bodyguard retreated. Less than half a cup of tea's time had passed, but from Shi Wanshan's point of view, it seemed like a long time had passed. Finally, a man dressed in plain clothes walked into the backyard. The bodyguard beside him had already proved his identity. "This commoner Yukon greets the two generals." The man cupped his fists and bowed slightly, then stood up straight again. He had an expression that was neither servile nor overbearing. Although he was a commoner, how many commoners could still act so naturally in front of the commander-in-chief? Just from this aspect alone, this person was different from ordinary people in many ways. "So it's Mr. Yu. Please take a seat," Ning Wenfeng said with a spring breeze smile on his face. Before the identity of this person was clear, this kind of reception was naturally done by him as a subordinate official. As he spoke, he waved his hand at the guard at the side, indicating for him to withdraw. Soon, only the three of them were left in the small courtyard. Yukon tasted the fragrant tea in front of him under Ning Wenfeng's indication. After a light sip, he nodded slightly. "Not bad, good tea. Hee, now that the war is imminent, we didn't know you were coming, so we didn't prepare well. However, the Duke of Loyalty and Courage must have some exceptional tea." Ning Wenfeng laughed mischievously, not forgetting to point the spearhead at the topic he wanted to discuss. Even now he was still very suspicious of Yu Kan's identity. Chapter 849. Tala City had long been sealed off. Even the Tatar cavalry couldn't charge in. How did this person appear here? It would be understandable if he was already in the city, but how did he get the latest instructions from the Duke of Loyalty? Could it be that Hai Dongqing had sent the message? But he didn't see any birds enter the city. How could he send the message? Both Ning Wenfeng and Shi Wanshan didn't know that there was a telegram in the world. Two people didn't need to meet at all. They could communicate with each other without being affected by distance. Naturally, Yukon had no obligation to tell them all this. He could even think of their doubts, but his duty wasn't to explain these things. He was just passing on a message. Yukon, the leader of the security bureau stationed in Tala City, was usually responsible for collecting information in the city and forwarding it to Director Feng Liang in First City on time. They thought that he would always be a dark worker, but today's telegram forced him to reveal his identity. The sixth young master had personally called and asked him to pass on a message to the city lord's office. They didn't dare disobey the sixth young master's orders. Thus Yukon came, and he even appeared here openly. He knew that perhaps this was the only way to dispel the two generals' worries and complete the matter. Ning Wenfeng's words were clearly probing, but Yukon still replied with a chuckle. "What good tea does the Duke of Loyalty have? I didn't have the chance to drink it. But if you suspect my identity because of this, you can arrest me as a liar." Such a straightforward answer immediately caused Ning Wenfeng to reveal a trace of awkwardness on his face. He didn't know how to respond. After all, there was no benefit in pretending to be someone from the Duke of Loyalty at this time. Shi Wanshan, who had been impatient for a long time, saw that the conversation was about to reach an impasse. He finally said, Mr. You said that you came on the orders of the Duke of Loyalty. Do you have anything to say to me? Commander, I came on the orders of the Duke of Loyalty. I do have something to tell you. According to the Duke of Loyalty, if Talis City can't be defended, there's no need to defend it anymore. We can just retreat to Xuanfu City. At that time, we can accumulate strength to defend it. Yukon was only halfway through his sentence when Ning Wenfeng interrupted him. How can Talis City not be able to defend itself? Furthermore, we are paid by the Imperial Court. Now that the Imperial Court has not issued a decree, how can we leave our posts without permission? Mr. Yu, do you know that your words just now are already a crime? One couldn't blame Ning Wenfeng for being angry. Yang Chendong might not care too much about the loss of Talis City, but as the general of the city's defense, he had a huge responsibility. If he did not handle it well, his reputation would be ruined. It was even possible that he would be imprisoned and beheaded. How could he not be anxious when it involved his own life? After Ning Wenfeng said this, Yukon closed his mouth. He first shook his head, then tasted the tea. He was not frightened by the other party's words. Yukon's calmness landed in the eyes of Shi Wanshan, who was standing beside him. His eyes could not help but light up. This person was so calm. Either he had something to rely on, or he had already disregarded life and death. Regardless, he believed that no one would come here to throw their lives away. He immediately suppressed Ning Wenfeng, who was about to explode, and smiled at Yukon. Mr. Yu, you must have something else to say. This commander is willing to listen with respectful attention. Since Shi Wanshan had spoken in this manner, Ning Wenfeng could only forcefully suppress the anger in his heart. After which, he viciously stared at Yukon. He wanted to see what this person was going to say next. If he continued to spout nonsense, he would not care if the other party was truly a loyal person. He would take him down first. Yukon slowly put down his teacup. He looked at Shi Wanshan and said word by word. The Duke of Loyalty said that Talis City can be abandoned, but Xuanfu City cannot be abandoned. As long as the commander defends Xuanfu and does not let the Tatar army take a single step forward, Talis City will return to the general's hands in 1 or 2 months at most. Oh, Shi Wanshan was stunned. He already knew there was more to it, but he didn't expect it to be like this. As his thoughts spun, he seemed to have thought of something. Is the Duke of Loyalty going to take action against the Tatar cavalry? What? Didn't the Duke of Loyalty send out troops a long time ago? Yukon replied with a smile. Yes, he did send out troops, but he didn't just put on a show. Ning Wenfeng finally had a chance to interject. He didn't know why, but the calmer Yukon was, the more he found him to be an eyesore. He came to his territory, and his little life was in his hands, yet he could still be as steady as Mount Tai. It was truly infuriating. Yukon seemed to be used to Ning Wenfeng's provocation. He didn't answer his question, but continued to speak with a calm expression. I came here on behalf of the Duke of Loyalty to deliver a message. As for whether you believe it or not, that's my problem. Of course, you can also capture me, or even torture me. I can't guarantee whether or not I can keep the secret in my heart. But in this way, it will delay the two generals' time to make a choice. You two can choose for yourselves. After laying everything out in the open, Yukon didn't say anything. He lowered his head and continued to drink his tea, like a thirsty person looking at sweet dew. His actions showed that he had completely disregarded life and death. Often, people like this didn't bow their heads easily. Even if they were captured and tortured, there wouldn't be a result in a short time. And it just so happened that Shi Wanshan didn't have much time left. If he made a single mistake, he wouldn't have the chance to turn things around. Mr. Yu, do you have any keepsake to prove your identity? Shi Wanshan still didn't give up. No. Yukon answered very straightforwardly. Then he added, Tulu City has already been sealed. Where would I get a keepsake? Without a keepsake, where did you get the news? Ning Wenfeng interrupted again, feeling that he had caught the other party's loophole. You don't have to worry about this. In short, I'm telling the truth. Whether you believe me or not, you two generals can consider it yourselves. Yukon definitely wouldn't tell them about the telegram. This was still a secret to the other forces. Of course, the longer it was hidden, the more advantageous it would be. The stubborn Yukon immediately made Ning Wenfeng give birth to a kind of feeling of not knowing where to cut. At that moment, he shifted his gaze to Sherwanshan. It was obvious that he wanted the commander to make the decision. Sherwanshan frowned. Yukan's appearance was too unexpected. He couldn't make a decision in a short time. He still needed more time to consider. He slowly raised his head. Mr. Yu, thank you for your information. How about this? I'll think about it before making a decision. Now please go back and rest. All right, there's no need to inform this commoner of your decision. It won't take long for the whole world to know of your decision. Yukon knew that his mission was completed. There was no point in staying any longer. He stood up, nodded to the two generals, and turned to leave. Outside the door, when the bodyguard escorted Yukon out, he saw the signal in Sherwanshan's eyes. He lightly nodded his head to show that he understood. Once Yukon left, Ning Wenfeng didn't care about anything else and said anxiously, Commander, you don't really believe that he was sent by the Duke of Loyalty and Courage, do you? He doesn't have anything on him to prove himself. If we can't get out, how can we prove it? Sherwanshan asked back and said, At this moment, do we have any other choice? But why did the Duke of Loyalty and Courage do this? Ning Wenfeng was speechless, so he changed his way of asking. Didn't you say it before? The Duke of Loyalty and Courage wants this supply route. This is the reason. Sherwanshan suddenly stood up, as if he was convincing himself, or perhaps he had already made a decision in his heart. Yukon left the city lord's mansion and returned to his own courtyard. He quickly turned off the lights and went to sleep. The bodyguard sent to follow him didn't find anything out of the ordinary, so he could only send someone else to keep watch while he hurried back to report the situation. Sherwanshan had long been prepared for this. Since Yukon dared to show himself, he would naturally clean up all the loose ends. He knew that it was impossible to find an answer from Yukon. However, Sherwanshan didn't want to let him go. Once he left Tulu City, he would take this person with him. If he wasn't sent by the Duke of Loyalty and Courage, then he would take his life before he died. It was also from this night that the Baiming army made preparations to retreat. Carriages carrying supplies to and from the Xian Manor came and went without end. 3 days later, Sherwanshan, who had been guarding the city with great difficulty, finally made preparations to leave the city when night fell. In order to prevent the Tatar army from discovering them, he left behind 2 Baihu offices and had them walk around with torches in hand, creating the illusion that the army was still there. In the end, Sherwanshan decided to believe Yukan's words and withdraw from Tulu City. When he and Song Wenfeng left the city lord's mansion, Yukan was already waiting in front of the main entrance with a bundle on his back. He clearly knew that the other party wouldn't let him stay here, so he might as well take the initiative and leave with them. Since Yukon was so tactful, Sherwanshan, who had no intention of turning hostile, walked over with a smile. What is the meaning of this, Sir Yu? Do you want to leave with us? There are no more Baiming army or civilians in the city. Yukon has no value in staying here, so I'll have to trouble the commander. Yukon stood there with a smile on his face, looking as if he had nowhere else to go. Ah, good. Men, prepare a group of good horses for Sir Yu to leave with us. Sherwanshan laughed heartily. Regardless of whether or not this Yukon was a loyal and courageous man, his courage and insight were enough to make him admire him greatly. In the dark night, torches stretched out in all directions. The Baiming army retreated from Tulu City, leaving behind an empty and resourceless ancient city. Chapter 850. The next day, when the sun rose, the 200 Baiming army quickly left. After breakfast, the Tatar army continued to attack the city. Only then did they discover that there was no resistance, and they were able to easily enter the city. News of the Baiming army's departure quickly reached Huboer's ears. Baiming army has retreated. Haha, good news. Let's enter the city. Huboer was overjoyed. Although the northern Ming army suffered the most losses during the siege, it was still very uncomfortable for him. He suffered losses every day, and he still had to defend against the attacks of the mercenaries from 10 miles away. This kind of feeling was really uncomfortable. Now that he had a city to defend, he had something to rely on. Moreover, Tulu City was originally a city that was easy to defend and hard to attack. It was connected to a nearby mountain range, so he only needed to defend the Xuanfu Gate to the east and the Grassland Gate to the west. This allowed him to divert his forces to do what he wanted to do. The Tatar army smoothly entered the city and was prepared for a sneak attack from the mercenaries. However, the enemy did not seem to see them and allowed them to do as they pleased. When all of the Tatar soldiers entered the city, the mercenaries suddenly moved and set up camp 8 miles away from the western city gate. At this point, the situation of closing the door and beating the dogs had already taken shape. Not only that, they also cut off all communication between the Tatar army and the outside world. Only when the mercenaries set up their tents did Hubo, who was standing on top of the tower, feel that something was wrong. Previously, when he was outside the city, he could send troops to search for food and water. However, now that he was in the city, he had a place to stay, but everything else seemed to be a problem. When he thought of the Baiming army's sudden retreat, especially when they did not see a single person or food after entering the city, he suddenly felt like he had been deceived. No, we can't be trapped in the city. We need a way out. Where is General Gaur? I'll give you 5,000 cavalry. Kill your way out before the enemy has a stable footing. The other generals are on standby. Once the opportunity arises, we'll destroy the mercenaries. Hubo stood on the city wall and suddenly gave the order to attack. General Gaur, who had just entered the city, had no choice but to get back on his horse after receiving his orders. He led the 5,000 cavalrymen straight to the mercenary camp outside the city. In the new army's barracks, as soon as the west gate of Tulu City opened, the scout immediately reported to Tiger's Mane. Commander Hu laughed and looked at Deputy Commander Shibi. The enemy is here to die. Haha, that's right. Shibi also laughed loudly. Although he used to be a member of the Tatar army, he was just a pawn that could be sacrificed at any time. Now that he had received Yang Qindong's great kindness, he saw himself as a member of the mercenary army. When it was time to be ruthless, he would definitely not be careless. Outside Tulu, General Gaur led 5,000 cavalrymen and rushed over with great momentum. But what awaited them was still a new division of recruits. In the previous battle, they didn't do anything. They only stood at the front as human shields. According to their commander, Hu Mang, the new army should first train their courage, so that they wouldn't be weak in the knees when they went on the battlefield to kill. Reality had already proven that many of the new soldiers showed expressions of fear when facing the charge of the Tatar cavalry last time. Even though they knew they had the support of the army behind them, they still couldn't help but be afraid. Fortunately, no one wet their pants in fear, so they passed the test. Now another test was about to begin. With the experience from last time, it could be seen that the quality of the new soldiers had improved quite a bit. At the very least, the fear on their faces had lessened a lot. Many of the new soldiers even showed signs of eagerness to fight. Gaur, who was charging forward, saw that the mercenaries were still using the same trick as the last time. For some reason, his heart started to pound as he rode on his horse. He had a premonition that he wouldn't be able to gain any benefits this time. But when he thought about how General Hubo was looking at him from the city wall tower behind him, he couldn't turn back. He could only lead the army forward. But in the process of charging, he intentionally slowed down and stayed at the back. Last time, General Mazum had been killed by a musket. With this experience, he wouldn't be so easily fooled. Gaur's premonition was very accurate. When the Tatar cavalry was 1 li away from the mercenaries, the new division's cavalry once again retreated to the sides, revealing the musket-wielding soldiers of the 6th Battalion behind them. Then the sound of gunfire rang out. One after another, the charging Tatar cavalry were shot off their horses. The smell of blood had already filled the air before the two sides had even come into contact. This scene greatly slowed the charging Tatar cavalry. Kill! Ma Xiangshan, the commander of the light cavalry regiment, shouted again. A regiment of 2,000 light cavalry poured out in full force, heading straight for the Tatar army that had already been frightened by the muskets. Retreat! Gaur, who was already at the rear, hurriedly shouted when he saw the same scene. He quickly reined in his horse and turned around, leading the army to retreat in a sorry state. In this battle, They had lost around 600 cavalry and had killed 0 enemies. On the tower of Talu City, Huboer saw everything with his eyes. He angrily turned around and left without saying a word. He couldn't blame Gar. He had listened to his orders and left the city, but falling down in the same place twice in a row wasn't a good feeling. It was as if he had swallowed a fly, causing him to burn with anger. Huboer couldn't vent his anger after occupying a dead city, so he ordered General Chiga to take his men out of East Gate Xian City. He wanted to continue the attack. Didn't the mercenaries want to cut off his supplies? Alright then, I won't walk past you. I'll head towards the hinterland of northern Ming. After several days of siege, the Baiming army had suffered heavy losses. Chiga's infantry had also been wiped out. Of the original 10,000 infantry, only 2,000 were left. They couldn't take down a city like Xian City with just them. After receiving the order, he could only tell Huboer the whole story. Afterwards, he gained the authority to command 10,000 cavalry and confidently left the city. However, what Chiga did not know was that within the Xian mansion, Shuwanshan had already set up his stance. Relying on the sturdiness of the city walls and the fact that he had joined up with the troops guarding the Xian mansion, he was confident that he would not allow the Tatar army to take advantage of him. Talu City quieted down once more. Knowing that he couldn't do anything to the mercenaries, Huboer gave up on the idea. He only needed to wait for good news from General Chiga. At that time, he only needed to leave a portion of his men to defend Talu City. The mercenaries would be blocked outside, and he would be able to lead his army to do whatever he wanted in the hinterland of northern Ming. The mercenaries below the city tower were as calm as ever. The soldiers woke up on time and went out for exercises. They were as free as if they were in their own city. They were waiting for the 6th young master to give the order to attack. In the first city, Yang Chendong didn't give the order to attack. He was also waiting for Shuwanshan and the Tatar army to both sides to suffer heavy losses. At that time, it would be time for him to send out his troops. While waiting, the Mongol tribes in the north of Mo Bay finally sent out good news. Fan Yuhai finally stopped waiting and revealed his devil's fangs. He used the excuse of marrying Tuoya as an excuse to replace Sud Khan. The Mongol camp in the north of Mo Bay was 100 miles west of the Inma River. It was the end of spring and the beginning of summer. The grasslands were no longer covered in snow and desolation. Instead, it was filled with greenery. However, as the flower of the north of Mo Bay, Princess Tuoya's mood was not as good as the weather. Instead, her face was extremely ugly and her heart was heavy. Ever since her father was injured and returned from Yindu, he had been bedridden. He stayed in a tent the size of a yurt and rarely saw guests. Even as his daughter, she had only seen him 3 times. Moreover, 2 of the times she saw the unconscious Sud Khan. He only woke up once and said to her with a smile that he had already found her a satisfactory husband. That was the famous General Fan Yuhai. Although Fan Yuhai was only 30 years old, he was much older than Tuoya. Especially when he was usually silent, he always gave people a feeling that strangers shouldn't get close to him. He also gave people a feeling of liveliness, which made Tuoya very uncomfortable. She couldn't understand why her father would make such a decision. Before, they had agreed that her husband would only marry if she agreed. Only, it was a pity that Sud didn't give her any opportunity to speak. After he finished speaking, he used the excuse that he was tired and needed to rest to forcibly have Tuoya leave. Ever since she left the tent, Tuoya's face didn't smile again. Facing a man she didn't understand at all. Yet he wanted to be her husband. And for a lifetime at that. She really couldn't accept this. However, she couldn't go against her father's orders, so she didn't know what to do either. She wanted to discuss this with others, but only then did she discover that the people she was familiar with were no longer by the side of the Khan's main tent. When the army retreated, Zamubala was killed by the mercenaries who stayed behind to cover the retreat. General Daesong was ordered to train the tribe's younger generation, hoping that they would have the strength to fight again. General Baoyin, who had the best relationship with her, was ordered to recruit new soldiers from the tribe to replenish the military strength lost in the previous battle. For a time, there was actually no one she could use, no one she could talk to. At this moment, Tuoya felt helpless and lonely. Before Tuoya was born, Sud was already the leader of a large force. After that, he, who had the bloodline of the Golden family, called himself the Khan. In other words, from the moment she was born, she had a noble status. She stretched out her hand for clothes, opened her mouth for food, and rarely did anything go wrong. The only time he had been rejected was when he saw the white dragon horse by the stream and wanted to buy it, but he was rejected. Chapter 851. When she thought of that rejection, for some reason, a smile appeared on Tuoya's face. Although she had been rejected in a very straightforward manner, she wasn't angry. On the contrary, she had seen the scene of the god of war slaughtering in all directions. Which young man didn't have feelings? Which young woman didn't yearn for love? It was from that time that a shadow appeared in the depths of her heart. However, she was smart enough not to mention it to anyone. In particular, her father's following actions had reduced the possibility of this existence to the lowest. This time, her father had been injured by a flintlock. Tuoya knew even more clearly that the distance between her and that man would only grow further and further. After all, no woman of the grasslands would choose to marry an enemy. She turned her mind back and thought about the problem in front of her. Tuoya became troubled again. She didn't like Fan Yuhai and always felt that she couldn't see through this man. She didn't want to live in this kind of unhappiness for the rest of her life, so she secretly made a decision. She would find an opportunity to enter the king's tent. She wanted to see her father and explain things clearly. Although she wasn't good at fighting, women seemed to be born good at acting. After Tuoya secretly made a decision, her performance was no different from normal. Even when some of the maids began to prepare clothes for her before marriage, she still greeted them with a smile. There wasn't the slightest hint of disobedience. Involuntarily, the expressions of the guards responsible for watching her became relaxed. Once Tuoya really married General Fan, she would become their mistress. Of course, it was best not to offend such a woman if possible. This day, as usual, Tuoya walked out of the yurt after eating dinner and went to the nearby grasslands to enjoy the night scenery. This had become a habit for the past few days. This was also her preparation for the following actions. In the past few days, it had been like this time and time again. The guards who were watching her were used to it. As long as she didn't disappear from their sight, they would let her do whatever she wanted. This was originally an order from General Fan. The fruits that were just delivered are not bad. How about this? Take out some for my father to try. Under the moon, the princess dressed in bright red robes waved her hand as she spoke. Beside her, a woman dressed in a maid's robe immediately acknowledged the order. Carrying a plate of fruits, she retreated, then lowered her head and walked towards the Khan's tent 100 meters away. She was only an attendant, so no one would pay attention to her. Even when she walked past the guards that were keeping watch, sure enough, no one took a second glance at her. And this caused Tuoya, who was extremely nervous in her heart, to be unable to help but heave a sigh of relief. Yes, the maid was Tuoya. The real maid was disguised as Tuoya and was sitting on a chair looking at the night sky. Taking advantage of the fact that no one was paying attention to her, Tuoya arrived in front of the main tent. The two guards guarding outside blocked her path. Who is it? Generals. This maid has brought a plate of fruits to the Khan under the orders of the princess. Please make an exception, and don't make things difficult for the servants. Tuoya lowered her head as much as possible, not allowing the other party to see her face clearly. She then spoke in a slightly submissive tone. In the past few days, Tuoya had learned a lot from the maids in her own tent. She had also learned some of the daily actions. The two maids guarding the door didn't suspect anything. They merely took a look at the plate of fruits and didn't discover anything unusual. After that, they waved their hands. The Khan is resting. Quickly enter and quickly leave. Many thanks to the two generals. Tuoya lowered her voice and a trace of joy flashed across her face. Then she stepped into the tent. Compared to the night sky outside, the yurt was much warmer inside, and there was also the smell of medicine. The moment Tuoya entered, she frowned. She hated the smell of medicine, but when she thought of her mission, she endured it and strode to the sleeping Suda's side. Then she saw the scene of her father sleeping peacefully. "Father, father, wake up. I am your daughter, Tuoya. I am here to see you," she softly called out. Knowing that there wasn't much time left, Tuoya stretched out her jade-like hand and gently shook the sleeping Suda. However, before her small hand could touch the body, Suda, who was lying on the bed, suddenly opened his eyes. When he looked carefully with the help of the candlelight, it was indeed his daughter, Tuoya. Suda instinctively looked outside. When he saw that there was no third person, he heaved a sigh of relief. Then he stretched out his hands and tightly grabbed Tuoya's outstretched hand. "Daughter, why are you here? Did they let you in?" "No, I thought of a way to sneak in," Tuoya explained. Seeing that his daughter, who had always been noble, was actually wearing a maid's uniform, Suda immediately understood. Then his gaze tightened and he said, "Good daughter, you are very smart. Father is very pleased. But time is limited, so I'll tell you what I'm going to say next. Right now, I'm under house arrest, and my injuries are acting up again and again. It's not that they can't treat me, but they don't want to treat me at all. Don't blame Dali Zhonggong for this. On the battlefield, swords have no eyes, and this is not a personal grudge. Father knows what you're thinking, and if you really like him, then go find him." Suda was obviously out of breath when he said these words. It was obvious that his physical condition was not very good. After taking 2 deep breaths, he said, "On the other hand, Fan Yufan wants to marry you. He just wants to seize the power of our Mongol tribe. Now I will tell everyone everything. You have to find a chance to leave here, and then find Narasong and Baoyin. They have been Fu Khan's old subordinates for many years. They are trustworthy. When the time comes, they will lead the army to save Fu Khan." In a hurry, Suda said a lot of things in one breath, and then he couldn't stop coughing, perhaps because his body couldn't take it. After he finished speaking, he lay back on the bed and waved his hand. "You should leave quickly. If you stay for a long time, it will inevitably arouse suspicion. Go." She just wanted to discuss her marriage with Fu Khan and give her opinion. She didn't expect to learn such a truth. Tuoya couldn't believe it. But after a moment of confusion, she calmed down. She also knew that this was not the time to talk. She looked at Suda, who was lying on the bed, and said, "Father Khan, take care of yourself." Then she turned around and left the tent. Outside the tent, the 2 guards waited for a while. When they didn't see anyone coming out, they were about to enter the tent when Tuoya, dressed as a maid, came out. "What happened? It's been so long. Did Khan wake up?" one of the guards asked with a puzzled expression. "No, Khan has been sleeping all this time." The servants saw that the bedside was too messy and casually tidied it up. Tuoya lowered her head and said in a quick-witted manner, "Oh." This explanation made the guard feel relieved. Then he nodded. "All right, there's nothing for you to do here. Quickly leave." It was no wonder that the 2 guards were so relieved. They knew that the medicine Suda took was originally a sleeping drug. After ordinary people took it, it would be difficult for them to wake up. But they didn't know that the medicine had already been discovered by Suda. How could a person who could become the Khan of a tribe be compared to ordinary people? Not only that, he also vomited it. This was also the reason why the yurt had a strong smell of medicine. Tuoya left. Not long after returning to the side of the princess, she followed her master back to the tent. But compared to before, Tuoya's eyes were more resolute. Previously, she felt that there was something wrong with her father. Logically speaking, when her father was sick, he should let his daughter take care of him. But not only did he not tell her once, he didn't even say a word of concern to her 3 times. Now that she knew the truth, Tuoya finally understood that it wasn't that her father didn't want her to say it, but that he couldn't. After knowing the truth, Tuoya was ready to leave. She first looked at the maid beside her. "Guna, how does the miss treat you?" "The princess's kindness is as great as a mountain. I'm willing to do anything for the princess." The maid who acted as Tuoya's maid felt touched. She immediately blurted out what was in her heart. In fact, Tuoya had given her a new life. When her parents died, it was the princess who arranged for them to be buried. Because of this, her life was already Tuoya's. "All right, then today is the day you repay me." Tuoya's heart was filled with a trace of reluctance. She knew that if she did this, Guna might not be able to survive. But for the sake of the Mongolian tribe in the Gobi Desert, she had to sacrifice her. The night was getting darker. The big tent was already dark. Even the guards who were watching the princess were closing their eyes to rest. For the past few days, nothing had happened. Under the influence of inertia, their vigilance began to become careless. However, just when everything was quiet, there was a sudden movement in the princess's tent. First, a black shadow rushed out of the tent and went straight into the distance. This sudden change immediately attracted a few guards to follow him out. They did not understand what was going on. What they needed to do was to stop the princess who rushed out of the tent. The guards moved very quickly. In less than half a cup of tea's time, they had stopped the woman who was running away with all her might. Then, one of them stood in front of the woman politely and cupped his fist. "Princess, it's late. You should go back and rest." After he finished speaking, the guard raised his head. When he raised his head, his eyes were filled with shock. You are not the princess. You are her maid." Ah. At this moment, Guna revealed a victorious smile, accompanied by her laughter. There was a sudden panic in the horse shed not far away. Then, a black-clothed figure madly galloped out, charging out of the unguarded tent and into the endless night. A moment later, a few more warhorses followed the black shadow into the night. What happened here was immediately reported to Fan Yuhai, who was sleeping in the tent. The person who came to report was Zhang Meng. He was the person in charge of Sud Khan's safety. He was in charge of everything in the Khan's camp. However, he never expected that the seemingly obedient Princess Tuoya would suddenly become a different person, leaving the camp on her own accord. Chapter 852. Fan Yuhai sat up from the bed, his gaze incomparably deep. His first feeling was that his crime had been exposed, and Tuoya definitely knew something. Although he still couldn't figure out what went wrong, Tuoya leaving for no reason already explained a lot of things. Immediately send someone to inform General Lu Duo, who is training nearby, to come back. Spread the news that Tuoya went against the Khan's betrothal and ran away. Anyone in the tribe who stops her or reports her whereabouts will be heavily rewarded. Yes. Zhang Meng replied and quickly left to pass down the order. Fan Yuhai, who was left behind, could not help but let out a long sigh. Seeing that he was about to succeed, as long as he married Tuoya, he could be considered the Khan's successor. He never thought that something like this would happen, and all his efforts would be for naught. Tuoya escaped. Using the maid Guna to attract the attention of others, she successfully escaped. The moment she mounted her horse, she quickly rushed towards the training grounds of Nari Song. She had lived here since she was young, so she was familiar with all the terrains. This was where her advantage lay. In the dark night, with one rider in front and several riders behind, the distance between the two sides was maintained at 500 to 600 meters. They were like shooting stars in the night sky, disappearing in a flash. The sky was finally about to brighten. Just as the sun slowly rose and the sky gradually brightened, Tuoya, who was at the front, finally saw a continuous stretch of barracks. Immediately, her eyes were filled with joy. Before she arrived, her shout rang out. "I am Princess Tuoya. I want to see General Nari Song." The Mongol cavalry guarding the barracks had already noticed a black figure in the distance. Out of instinct, they shot out their bows and arrows, preparing to kill the person who came. However, when they heard the shout, they could not help but put down their bows. Those with good eyesight looked carefully and recognized Tuoya's figure. Although she was dressed in black and was not as eye-catching as when she was dressed as a princess, the number one chest under the heavens was majestic. Those who had seen it would not forget it. Immediately that person said, "It really is Princess Tuoya. Come, open the tent and quickly inform the general." Tuoya successfully rushed into the tent. The guards behind her also followed. Perhaps the Mongol cavalry thought that they were the princess's guards. In front of the big tent, Tuoya reined in her warhorse. Only then did the exhaustion on her body become apparent. However, when she thought of her father's instructions, she took a deep breath and jumped off her warhorse. But at this moment, the 6 guards behind him also caught up. They jumped off their horses at the same time and blocked Tuoya, who was about to move forward. One of them said with a cold face, "Princess, please get on the horse and go back with us. The Khan and General Fan are waiting for you." "What if I say no?" This was no longer her father's tent, so when Tuoya spoke, her confidence was a bit stronger. "Then don't blame us for being impolite." The guard's eyes lit up. They were the ones who had lost him. If they couldn't bring him back, he would definitely die. At this moment, they had no choice. After saying that, 2 of the 6 guards reached out and pressed down on Tuoya's shoulder. At this moment, when they made their move, they didn't care that the person in front of them was the princess of the Mongol Empire. They also didn't care that this woman might become their mistress in the future. Although Tuoya grew up in the grasslands and learned riding and martial arts, it was only on the surface. If she really had to face the guards with extraordinary skills, she naturally wouldn't be able to win. Seeing the 2 hands grabbing at her, Tuoya's eyes flashed with anger and anxiety. "What are you doing?" Right at that moment, a loud roar rang out, following which, a burly man from the grasslands walked out of the tent. Along with him were dozens of elite guards and more Mongolian warriors from the camp who were closing in on them. The person who came was Nari Song, one of Sud Khan's trusted aides. When he heard the report that the princess had come, he was wondering why she was here. He walked out with curiosity and didn't expect to see someone wanting to make a move on Tuoya. How could this be? This was clearly going against his superiors. Nari Song spoke up to stop him. The moment Nari Song appeared, the guards who were about to make a move knew that they had missed the opportunity. They immediately turned around and bowed. "General, please calm down." The princess was playful and ran out. "We will bring her back now and not cause trouble for you." "You guys are the ones who are playful." Tuoya saw that someone was twisting the truth in front of her. How could she let it go? After retorting, she looked at Nari Song and said, "General, I have something to discuss with you. Please report to your men. At the same time, I would like to ask you to lock up these 6 people first. I will give you an explanation later." "General, you can't believe the princess' words so easily. General Fan is still waiting for us to return." The 6 guards knew that they were about to ruin things and hurriedly spoke out. "If I don't believe the princess, should I believe you guys? Also, don't use Fan Yuhai to pressure others. Others might be afraid of him, but I'm not." Men, take the 6 of them away. If they resist, kill them." Nari Song, who had killed decisively on the battlefield, had a cold expression on his face. His eyes were filled with killing intent. With just a few words, the 6 guards had surrendered. If they lived, at least there was hope. If they resisted, only death would await them. Tuoya finally followed Nari Song into the large tent. She then told him everything she had seen her father last night, and what Suda had told her. When Nari Song heard the news, he was shocked. "There's actually such a thing? The Khan is under house arrest?" "That's right." When Tuoya said this, she couldn't stop the tears from flowing out of her eyes. She hadn't cried before because she didn't dare to, but now she was safe. The pain in her heart could no longer be suppressed. Tears finally flowed out. "Princess, don't be sad. The Khan's life isn't in danger yet. There's still a way. How about this? We've been running all night. Princess, go rest first. I'll find General Baoyin, and then we'll discuss how to save the Khan." Nari Song's eyes were filled with sorrow. His own Khan was under house arrest. This was a reflection of the incompetence of the generals. However, he also knew that Fan Yuhai wasn't easy to deal with. If he led the army to kill him now, the outcome was unknown. It might even implicate the Khan's life. It was better to find Baoyin first and discuss how to proceed. Not long after Nari Song gave the order, General Baoyin, who was recruiting soldiers outside, returned to the large tent. This scene was discovered by the spies of the Security Bureau in the Mongolian tribe. The news was sent to the director of the Security Bureau of the First City, Fengliang, by telegram. Yang Mansion, First City. Yang Chendong listened to Fengliang's report. At the same time, he patted Fengliang's shoulder. "Not bad. The Security Bureau did a good job this time. Thank you for the praise, 6th young master." Feng Liang's face flashed with joy, but it quickly disappeared. He was all ears. Continue to watch their every move. Report to me immediately if there's any situation. While Yang Qindong digested the news, he couldn't help but sigh. There were still too few troops. Seeing that the Mongolian tribe in Mabe was about to have internal strife, he couldn't send troops to quell the chaos. It was a pity. Feng Liang took the order and left. Looking at his back, Yang Qindong thought that this person's temperament was good. He was calm and capable. If he kept it up, he would be a promising talent. But this thought was just a fleeting thought. For Yang Qindong, it was still a problem of how to mobilize troops. Otherwise, no matter how big the opportunity was in front of him, he wouldn't have the power to intervene without enough troops. Yang Si, find Beta Persei. After nodding to Yang Si beside him, Yang Qindong sat back on the chair. Wu Sheng's 3rd Division had been sent to the north. There had been no news for a long time, and he didn't know how it was progressing. Tiger's Mane's 1st Army was stationed under Tulu City, and couldn't be mobilized. Yang Qindong had to turn his attention to the logistics group. Although it was called the logistics group, its strength was incomparable. When the number of prisoners reached its peak, the number of prisoners reached more than 10,000. In the eyes of other forces, this would definitely be a good army. But for Yang Qindong, who pursued elite troops, he only used them as a construction team and good labor. While he was thinking about the problem, Beta Persei rushed over from outside the courtyard. Since Yang Si and Yang Lu arrived at the beginning city, his work pressure had decreased a lot, and he had put more energy into the logistics group. As soon as he entered the courtyard, he first saluted Yang Qindong and then said, "Young master, Beta Persei is here to report." "Humph. Clever boy." Looking at Beta Persei's businesslike appearance, Yang Qindong said with a smile in his eyes, which immediately attracted Yang Si's laughter. The atmosphere was very relaxed when they were together. Yang Qindong casually pointed to the table in front of him, where there was an open box of God of War cigarettes. Beta Persei didn't stand on ceremony and reached out to take it. He first gave one to the 6th young master, then casually lit one for himself. As for Yang Si, he didn't like this kind of thing, so he just let it go. When the smoke lingered, Yang Qindong slowly said, "If the logistics group is pulled up, how many people can they fight?" When it came to business, Beta Persei's expression became much more serious. Faced with this question, he didn't answer immediately. Instead, after a little hesitation and thought, he nodded and said, "About 5,000 people. They can probably reach the combat strength of a C-rank army." In Yangxia, the combat strength of a team would be at different levels according to different grades. For example, the Cold Front naturally had the highest combat strength, which was A rank. For example, the veterans of the new army could basically reach B rank. The D rank was generally the so-called militia and reserve. They had only undergone simple military training, and might be able to win by relying on their numbers. Once they gnawed on a hard bone, it was basically impossible to point at them. There were also the Black Knights of the Guards. With their strong individual combat quality and elite equipment combination, their combat strength could reach the terrifying S rank. Unfortunately, there were too few such troops and it would take too much effort to train them. It was not desirable. Chapter 853. Beta Persei said that the logistics team could reach C rank. That was already good enough. With a little training, they would have no problem dealing with normal enemies. Yang Qindong was quite satisfied with this answer. At least he nodded. "Alright, I'll work hard for a while. Train these 5,000 people well, and strive to take a step forward. Young master has great use for them." "Understood." Beta Persei nodded. He rubbed his palms together and leaned forward. "Young master, how long will it take?" "Half a month to 20 days. Yang Qindong answered without hesitation. Obviously, in his eyes, the internal conflict of the Mongol tribes in the north of the Gobi Desert would begin within this time frame. He wanted these people to be reinforcements and help out. Yes. Beta Persei received the order and hurried out of the Yang mansion. Yang Qindong stayed behind and said to Yang Si, "Send a telegram to Tiger's Mane. We can make our move at Talu." If we can't take it in time, the young master won't blame him. But if we leave Ma Bei, it has nothing to do with him. Yang Chendong didn't put his hopes on these 5,000 soldiers. They were just there to replenish the losses of the new army. His focus was still on Tiger's Mane. Okay. Yang Si nodded and left. Half an hour later, the commander of the Tiger Radiance army who was stationed outside Tulu City received the telegram. His eyes widened in shock. Men, call the deputy commander, division commander, and commander over. We're having a war meeting. In Talu, Hubo, who didn't know that the war was about to begin, was having a meeting with a few generals. The army had taken Talu as they wished. They finally had a place to rest. But as the general, Hubo didn't relax at all. After attacking Xian Manor for a long time without success, they had lost soldiers and generals, and their rations were dwindling. All of these were problems that had to be resolved immediately, and they were also heavy burdens that pressed down on his heart. No, we have to think of a way to get out of the city. At the very least, we have to open a passage that belongs to us. Otherwise, as time passes, we will fall into chaos before anyone else attacks us. If we send out mercenaries, which of the generals will be willing to take the lead? Suddenly Boer's voice rang out. Inside the hall, Gao Er, Hulin and Muren all lowered their heads in unison. It wasn't that they weren't brave, nor that they were afraid of death. It was just that they didn't have much confidence in winning against the mercenaries' guns. Rashly charging in would only result in death. The three generals lowered their heads in silence, which infuriated Hubo. What? Could it be that you want this general to personally charge into the enemy lines? No. The three generals hurriedly denied. Then, each of them prepared to say something. However, before they could think of what to say, a loud bang was suddenly heard. Then the ground started to shake. It felt like the end of the world had arrived. What's going on? Could it be that an earth dragon has been born? Huboer asked, trying his best to stabilize himself. The faces of the other three generals were also deathly pale. If that was the case, it would be too dangerous for them to stay in the city. Who knew when the stone above their heads would fall? If that happened, they would be routed before the battle even started. Report. Just as the generals were still making wild guesses, a messenger ran in from outside the door. General, something bad has happened. The mercenaries have begun to attack the city. Just now, 2 of their cannons landed on the city gate and opened up a gap. Fortunately, our brothers reacted quickly and shot arrows at them. Only then were they pushed back. Cannons? Attack. Hearing these words, Hubo quickly thought of something and said, "Let's go. General, follow me outside to take a look." Outside the city of Tulu, the first wave of sieging troops retreated with brute force. There was nothing they could do about it. The archery skills of the Tatar army were extremely accurate. Although the city gates were opened, they were still able to force the army back. "Sai, we still don't have enough cannons. If we could fire all at once, what would the Tatar army be?" Independent Division Commander Xian Honghai sighed. "Yes, if everyone uses cannons, what would we be? What would cavalry be?" Heavy Cavalry Regiment Commander Zhue Feng replied. From his point of view, guns and cannons were only a means of support. In the end, they still had to rely on the cavalry to win. Otherwise, why would they spend so much money on a cavalry unit? That's enough. My vice commander expected this to be a bad start. Blowing open the city gates is just telling them that we're about to attack. Tiger's Mane stood up and looked coldly at the officers below. He then said, "Everyone go back and rest. Tomorrow we'll set up the formation. Since everyone is talking about the importance of cavalry, we'll give you a chance to show off tomorrow. But remember, if anyone drops the ball, don't blame me for coming back to teach him a lesson." "Don't worry, Commander. Let's see how we perform tomorrow." The officers finally heard the news of the battle, and they all said excitedly. Then they went to prepare. When only the commander and vice commander were left in the tent, Shibi asked, "Commander, are we really running out of cannons?" "Not much. At most, there are only 10 cannons left. In the future, don't use them unless it's absolutely necessary." Tiger's Mane nodded and answered seriously. "Are there no more cannons in the beginning city?" Shibi couldn't help but ask curiously. No more. The cannons are all transported from Qiqian City and the cost is too high. Because of the danger, we won't transport too many cannons at once. With the conditions of the beginning city, it's impossible to make cannons. The sixth young master told us all this when we came. Tiger's Mane explained patiently. However, he had a feeling that the logistics team of the beginning city should still have cannons in stock. It was just that Beta Persei didn't give them to him. Speaking of which, it shouldn't be Beta Persei's idea but the sixth young master's idea. This should be because he was afraid that they would rely too much on the cannons and break the training of the cavalry. He agreed with this point. After all, there was a cost calculation in war. A cannon shell required too much manpower and material resources. If it was only used in this kind of war, hundreds of cannons might not be enough. If this war continued, even if Qiqian City's business was developed, there would be a time when it couldn't hold on. Shibi didn't know so many confidential things. However, he still understood one principle. In the following war, they couldn't rely too much on cannons. It was best to use firearms sparingly, unless it was absolutely necessary. Their new army could win not only because of these external forces, but also because they had the strength to do so. It's fine. Then let the cavalry charge. Our soldiers eat well, wear good clothes, have good weapons and are full of spirit. The rewards for fighting are also high. As long as the soldiers fight with their lives, there's no enemy we can't defeat. Shibi encouraged himself. That's right. Tiger's Mane nodded. So what if they didn't use cannons this time? They could still use their cavalry to defeat the Tatar army. Then, they would let the people of the grasslands know that the sky had changed. A declaration of war was shot into the tower of Tulu City. Soon the letter appeared in front of Hubo. After reading the letter, Hubo suddenly raised his head and laughed. Haha, you really overestimate yourselves. If you use cannons and firearms, we might be afraid of you. But if it's just a competition of cavalry, then I'll show you who's the real hero of the grasslands. Men, give the order. The army will rest well tonight and set off tomorrow. The letter was naturally the letter of challenge. The letter clearly stated that a mountain cannot accommodate two tigers. In order to prove who was the real ruler of the grasslands, the mercenaries were willing to put away their cannons and firearms. They hoped that the Tatar army would not be a coward. Otherwise, the cannons would fall on Tulu City at any time. At that time, they wouldn't be able to say that they didn't give them a chance to bully them. The Tatar army was afraid of the mercenaries, but they were afraid of their firearms. If they didn't use them, what was there to be afraid of? After reading the letter, the other generals also asked to fight. From the looks of it, they obviously wanted to show off their skills. Good. Tomorrow General Gore will lead the charge. I'll give you 10,000 cavalry. You must perform well, and let the mercenaries know the power of our Tatar cavalry. Haha. Hubo was in a good mood and his laughter rang out like thunder in the hall. On this night, both armies entered a state of rest early in the morning. Even the mercenaries did not train at night. Everyone was holding back their energy and waiting for tomorrow's performance. The next morning, the weather was beautiful. There were no clouds in the sky for thousands of miles. Under the clear sky, the two sides began to set up their formations on the battlefield. 10,000 Tatar cavalrymen marched out of Tulu City. With 1,000 men as a unit, they formed 10 different formations and stood in front of the mercenaries who had formed their formations first. The mercenaries were still in a long snake formation. From afar, they looked like a sea of military green, giving people the feeling that they could topple mountains and overturn seas. Compared to the previous two times, the first line was no longer the cavalry of the new division. Instead, it was the soldiers of the Tatar division. The commander of the Tiger Mang army wanted to use the Tatars to fight the Tatars. In his words to Commander Su He, this battle was their chance to prove themselves. Although they were both Tatar cavalry, they didn't belong to the same faction. Su He was originally Agar Dorji's subordinate, while Hubo belonged to the Khan's faction. Normally, there would be animosity between them, and it was only a matter of time before they clashed. Right now, it was just that Tiger's Man had created an opportunity for them. Chapter 854. The two armies stood in front of each other, and the battle was about to begin. Before that, Tiger's man said to the Tatar division commander, Suhi, today's battle will depend on your performance. You have 6,100 men, while the enemy has 10,000. That's not enough, so I'll give you command of the heavy cavalry to make up for it. As for how the battle will turn out, I'll just wait and see. Don't worry, Commander. If we can't win this battle, I'll bring my head to you, Suhi said confidently. With the elite weapons in hand, the 3-to-3 battle style, and the tip of the arrow technique, he really didn't have anything to fear in the face of 10,000 Tatar cavalry. All right, trumpeters, listen to Division Commander Su's orders. Knowing that he had said all he needed to say, Tiger's man retreated to the side and handed command of the battle to Division Commander Su He. This was also taught by Yang Chendong. According to him, no one could monopolize everything in a war. Moreover, opportunities on the battlefield were often fleeting. Therefore, the frontline commanders were the ones who understood the situation of the battlefield the best. They would go all out even if it was for their own lives. Unless it was necessary, no one should disturb the commanders on the front lines. After taking command, Suhi was even more confident. He shouted to a division commander, "Soldiers, this is our chance to prove ourselves. Let's do our best and beat the enemy until their parents can't even recognize them, okay?" "Yes." The 6,100 cavalrymen replied loudly. "Haha, come blow the bugle call." Beep 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 beep. The blood-boiling bugle call sounded out, and the 6,100 cavalrymen split into platoons or companies, forming hundreds of tip of the arrow, and galloped forward on their horses. Everyone's dust surged under the hooves of their horses, like the surging waters of the Yangtze River rushing away. On the city walls of Teru, the war drums also sounded. After the 10,000 Tatar cavalry received the order, they charged forward under the lead of General Gar. Unlike the mercenaries, they attacked from the left wing, the middle, and the right wing. On the city wall, Hubo personally commanded the battle. When he saw that the mercenaries had only sent out 6,000 men, he couldn't help but laugh out loud. The disparity in numbers has already proven their failure. This time, I will let these cavalry trample over their corpses, and let them know who is the true overlord of this grassland. Hubo's words were very domineering, but he had his reasons for doing so. After all, when the Tatar Iron Cavalry was at its peak, even the Wara and Mongol tribes were no match for them. Not to mention, they had the advantage in numbers. He couldn't see any possibility of failure. Compared to Hubo's confidence, General Gar's eyes flashed with uncertainty. He realized that the mercenaries were charging at them in a way that they had never seen before. This gave him a very bad feeling. People were always afraid of unfamiliar things, and that was exactly what General Gore was feeling at this moment. According to him, he should send out 1,000 to 2,000 soldiers first to test the strength of the enemy. Unfortunately, although he was the vanguard general, he did not have the authority to command. He had no choice but to charge with the army while carefully observing the power of the enemy's battle formation. In a cavalry charge, before the two sides met, there would often be a test of arrows. In modern terms, it was time to put on a show. When the two sides were about 200 meters apart, the vanguard troops began to fire their arrows. As he galloped on his horse, he continued to shoot arrows. Those who were good at riding would lie down on their horses to maintain their stability and increase the accuracy of their arrows. At the same time, they could better protect themselves and reduce the chances of becoming a target. Those who were good at riding would lie down on their horses and use this as cover to fire arrows from afar. Archery on horseback was a skill to begin with. Those who were strong could even gain the complete upper hand in the first round of archery, crushing the enemy into a state of disarray. The facts also proved that after the two sides began to fire arrows, at least 200 soldiers fell on their horses. If one looked carefully, the losses on both sides were almost equal. Gore's expression became even uglier when he realized that he did not gain any advantage. He was very confident in the archery skills of the cavalry in his hands, but they did not gain any advantage. He felt a lot of pressure. When he thought of the difference in the enemy's formation and the unknown power, he felt more and more uneasy. Gore would soon be able to feel the power of the arrows. With 2,000 men on each side, the number of cavalry in his central army was exactly the same as the number of soldiers of the Tatar division. This meant that he had no advantage. When his 6 cavalry phalanxes collided with the Tatar division, the arrow tip formation began to show its power. More than 200 sharp arrow tips suddenly pierced into the Tatar cavalry. In just one head-on collision, 4 of the 6 phalanxes were disrupted. Without the phalanxes, the cavalry's advantage was reduced by more than half once they were in a single attacking posture. When they could not coordinate with each other and could not crush each other, where did the cavalry's power come from? Puff, 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 streams of blood splattered. The Tatar cavalry could not pay attention to their left and right in the arrow tip formation. Often, just as they blocked the saber coming from the left, the saber from the right would appear again. In the clashing of weapons, a moment of carelessness would cause them to be injured or even killed. With the help of the battle formation, the Tatar division immediately made their opponents feel that there were enemies everywhere, opponents everywhere, and danger everywhere. Kill. Break through their battle formation, especially the leader. Surround and kill him. Feeling the power of the tip of the arrow, even Gore was accidentally scratched on his chest. Fortunately, he dodged quickly enough, and the saber did not pierce through his armor. Even so, he was still given a fright. Only after entering the formation did he realize how terrifying it was. He immediately shouted and thought that he had found a loophole in the battle formation. He gathered his troops and attacked the first person in the formation. The formation had a strong side and a weak side. It was like how there were many death gates in the formation, but there were also life gates. There was no doubt that the strength of the arrow tip formation lay in the leader. He was like the sharp tip of a saber. Once he stabbed into a person's heart, it would be like the body of a saber stabbing into a person's heart, making it impossible to guard against. But what if the tip of the saber was blocked or even cut off? The result would most likely be different. Gore was indeed a veteran general who had been on the battlefield for a long time. He immediately made adjustments. Then on the battlefield, the Tatar cavalry charged at the arrow tip formation after hearing the order. They looked like they would pay any price to behead the leader of the arrow tip formation. However, there were too many arrow tip formations. Even if they expended a great deal of effort to cut off a tip, the other soldiers could quickly find a new one. There was also the 3-3 formation that could be used. This was a formation that could be formed by 3 cavalrymen. It could increase the power of both offense and defense by several times, making it impossible to defend against. After expending a great deal of effort and sacrificing countless cavalrymen, they did not obtain the result they wanted. Instead, their charge was thrown into disarray by the formation. In a short period of time, the 6,000 Tatar soldiers were divided into over 100 groups, and the number of casualties continued to increase. Gore, who was protected by his personal guards, was also surrounded by the 4 arrow points formation. He commanded his soldiers to cut off one of the sword points, but another one would take its place. Seeing that he was in danger, he had no choice but to issue an order for the 4,000 cavalrymen on the left and right to come to his aid to maintain the balance of the situation. Gore, who was in the middle of the formation, was already panicking. However, he had forgotten that while he was the vanguard general, there was another general on the city walls who held a much higher position than him. He was Hubo, or had already taken over command of the battlefield. He was the one who controlled the beats of the drums. In ancient wars, soldiers relied on the beats of the drums to decide whether to advance or retreat. In this aspect, the mercenaries who used bugles to command were different from them. They were more flexible, and could even be said to be at the forefront. Oftentimes, whoever controlled the drums would control the army. For example, when charging, they had to beat the drums to boost morale. When retreating, they had to beat the drums to signal a retreat. Hubo's expression was ugly when he saw Gore's cavalrymen being pierced through by the mercenaries. However, he did not send out any reinforcements. He wanted to wait for the 2 sides to reach a stalemate before sending out the remaining 4,000 cavalrymen. That way, victory would be assured. Hubo had overestimated the strength of his cavalry and underestimated the strength of the mercenaries. Just as he wanted to observe the situation and stimulate the fighting spirit and potential of General Gar and the others, the mercenaries on the main battlefield were slowly gaining the upper hand. With the help of the formation, more and more Tatar soldiers were being cut down from their horses. With the help of the formation, the Tatar cavalrymen had to face the sharp sabers coming from all directions. It was simply impossible to defend against the attacks. The battle went unexpectedly smoothly. Division Commander Su He once again raised his blade and cut down his target. Using this opportunity, he looked around and found that most of the remaining cavalrymen were his own. There were very few enemy cavalrymen left. He was so excited that he couldn't help but have a greater ambition. Seeing that the enemy troops on both sides were still wandering around, he still wanted to take advantage of the situation and didn't have the intention to send out his troops. He called for the commander of the 1st Battalion, Gu Shan. You attack from the east, I'll attack from the west. We'll disrupt the enemy's formation and obtain a greater victory. Chapter 855. Understood. Gu Shan, who had matured into a proper battalion commander, immediately agreed. He then rode his horse across the battlefield, notifying the other battalion commanders and company commanders. In an instant, wherever he went, more and more arrows were pointed at the cavalry on both sides. The drums on the city walls were still as steady as before, showing no signs of launching the final attack. The 4,000 cavalry on both sides were still waiting. Many of them did not even take out their sabers. They were still holding on to their crossbows, waiting for an opportunity to shoot. Just as they were looking for an opportunity suddenly presented itself to them. A large number of cavalrymen in green military uniforms suddenly rushed out and charged towards them. Release the arrows, release the arrows. The Tatar cavalry naturally wouldn't miss out on such a good opportunity. They immediately fired arrows from afar, causing quite a few of the Tatar cavalry soldiers charging at them to fall off their horses. However, even more of the soldiers relied on their proficient horsemanship and fast speed to break through the blockade of arrows and kill their way to the front of the Tatar cavalry. Just as the Tatar cavalry on both sides were about to release a second wave of arrows, the mercenaries had already used their speed to rush in front of them. One side wielded a bow, while the other wielded a saber. A one-sided slaughter had begun. The sudden change caught the Tatar cavalry off guard. It went so smoothly that it was out of Su He and Gu Shan's expectations. However, since the opportunity was right in front of them, no one would not cherish it. All the soldiers immediately roared, and the heads of the Tatar cavalry flew into the air. Blood flowed all over the ground, and the stench of blood filled the air. Not good. Hubo, who was standing on the city walls, cried out in alarm. He quickly shouted to the drummer beside him. Pass down the order. The entire army is to move out. The two sides will attack together with the main force. This order was given a little too late. If it was given a quarter of an hour earlier, perhaps the situation would not be too bad even if it was not to their advantage. However, it was clearly too late now. Everything was too late. The 4,000 cavalry on the two sides were caught off guard. In a single charge, they had lost at least a quarter of their men. They had already lost the best opportunity to attack. General, let's retreat. General Mu Ren and General Hu Lin, who were watching the battle, knew that the only way was to retreat quickly. Otherwise, the loss would be greater. Even though she did not want to accept this result, Huboer knew that if the battle went on like this, their losses would only be greater. She could only nod and say, send down the order to retreat. Archers on the city gate tower, get ready to prevent the enemy from taking the opportunity to charge into the city. The sound of the gong finally rang out. To Gore, who was still in the formation, it was like the sound of a celestial being. After a fierce charge, a bloody path was finally carved out, and the army retreated into Tulu City. However, compared to the 10,000 cavalry that had left the city, not even half of them had returned. After 4 hours of fighting, the Tatar cavalry had paid a price of more than 5,000 men, and nearly 2,000 of them were injured. On the other hand, the Tatar cavalry division had less than 500 casualties and around 3,000 wounded. Just looking at the number of casualties, It was an exaggeration of 10 to 1. From this, one could see how powerful the arrow formation was. Don't chase a cornered enemy. Let the new division clean up the battlefield. The Tatar division, retreat and rest. Tiger's Mane looked at the bloody battlefield in front of him with a satisfied and happy expression. This battle had shown the might of the new division. Even though they had lost 3,500 men, they did not use any firearms to kill 5,000 and injure 2,000. No matter how one looked at it, it was a great victory. Su He, who was covered in the blood of the enemy, retreated with his troops. Tiger's Mane and Shibi went up to him and praised him. Tiger's Mane immediately said that he would report this battle to the 6th young master, and try to get a second-class merit for the Tatar division. Even though they were tired from fighting all the way, when they heard the result, all the soldiers of the Tatar division still cheered loudly. This not only represented honor, but also represented that after this battle, each of them would receive a generous reward. This scene caused the other divisions to be filled with envy. The head of the heavy cavalry regiment, Zhui Feng, directly rode up to Su He and hammered his bloody chest. "You're not particular. You didn't call our heavy cavalry regiment for such a good thing. You didn't even give us a share of the merit, huh? Haha, the combat strength of the heavy cavalry regiment is very strong. Once they take action, they will definitely make the enemy tremble in fear. As the saying goes, good steel should be used on the blade. It is better to leave it for the next time to make a greater contribution." Su He chuckled, changing from his previous stern expression. Zhui Feng heard this and immediately nodded his head proudly. This time, Su He did not arrange for the heavy cavalry regiment to kill the enemy. Even though he felt a bit regretful, he was not angry. Just as the other party had said, good steel should be used on the blade. He was looking forward to the moment when he would make a move. On the battlefield, the recruits felt the cruelty of war by cleaning up the battlefield. During this period of time, there were also some Tatar cavalrymen who pretended to be dead, but they were discovered by them. Quite a few warriors killed the enemy and rendered meritorious service. As a result, the other recruits were endlessly envious. Everyone followed suit. Regardless of whether the enemy was dead or not, there was nothing wrong with killing them first. The recruits are also growing. Tiger's Man looked at this scene and said with gratification, "Yes, everyone is growing. It's just that can't we give them a boost?" The vice commander on the side suggested. "Oh, vice commander, what do you mean?" "Jingguan. This is the 6th young master's best method to intimidate the enemy. At the same time, it's also a chance to train the recruits." Zhui Feng did not hide anymore and took the initiative to speak his mind. "Yes, the idea is not bad. Give the order to Commander Luzhua and let him know." Tiger's Man only hesitated for a moment before agreeing. Although killing a dead person wasn't considered a hero, it was still considered to have seen blood. With this kind of experience, they would not be as afraid on the battlefield as before. Of course, the Jingguan could also intimidate the enemies in Tulu City. It would let them know what the consequences of going against the mercenaries were. The two commanders agreed, and the Jingguan was immediately established. During this process, countless recruits vomited and their faces turned pale. They felt weak all over. However, just as the two commanders thought, after this experience they had matured a lot. When they fought again, their blades were steadier, and their hearts were more resolute. On Tulu City, Hubei, and the others could only watch as the huge Jingguan was built. There was nothing they could do. The sky was already dark. It was hard to predict what would happen if they sent out troops now. Even if they wanted revenge, they could only wait until the next day. Rest well. Victory and defeat are common in war. In tomorrow's battle, we must make up for today's losses. After saying this, Hubei turned and left. While the Tatar cavalry were waiting for revenge, the mercenaries were also waiting for tomorrow's battle to gain merit. Because just a moment ago, Tiger's Man had announced the war god's decision. The Tatar division would be awarded a second-class merit, and all the rewards would be sent to the camp the next day. The soldiers of the Tatar division were naturally overjoyed. In the eyes of the soldiers of the other divisions, other than envy, they secretly made up their minds to fight for tomorrow's battle and perform even better. Under the anticipation of both sides, the moon set and the sun rose. The next day came as promised. Hu Bei picked another general, this time another general, Hu Lin, and gave him 10,000 cavalrymen. After summing up the experience from last time, Hu Bei handed over the authority of war to Hu Lin, allowing him to perform on the battlefield. In the new army, the independent division replaced the Tatar division from yesterday's battle. Considering that the independent division still had 6 battalions of musketeers, Tiger Edge replaced all of them with Deng Yu's direct subordinate regiment. At the same time, they also selected 3 battalions from the new recruit division for training purposes. On the other hand, the heavy cavalry and light cavalry units stood at the side, awaiting the orders of their division commander, Xian Honghai. The reason for this arrangement was naturally because the Tatar division had performed too many meritorious deeds in yesterday's battle. The other divisions already had quite a few complaints, so they couldn't let a certain division have all the glory today. Everyone had to get a share of the benefits. As a result, the total number of mercenaries for today's battle was 6,900, which was 2 more battalions than yesterday. At the same time, the heavy cavalry and light cavalry units were on standby, ready to assist at any moment. With that, they had close to 1,000 more men than the enemy. One side beat the war drums, while the other side beat the bugle. Both sides started to gather at the center of the battlefield at around 9 a.m. While they were still far away, a heavy pressure could be felt. The Tatar general, Hu Lin, was in the middle of the army and did not charge onto the battlefield immediately. He wanted to see how the mercenaries fought, so that he could change his strategy at any time. Just last night he had already discussed the mercenaries' arrow point formation with Gower and Murun, and had come up with a plan to deal with it, which was to dodge. Isn't the tip of your arrows very sharp, and can pierce through a cavalry formation? Then when you come, we'll just move aside. It feels like I'm punching cotton. When you're tired, they'll suddenly attack from the sides and attack your flanks. This way, they won't fight against the tip of the sword, and will only attack the back of the sword. Presumably, they'll be able to suppress the bravery and sharpness of the mercenaries to the greatest extent. On the battlefield, once one side lost their sharpness, it usually meant that victory and defeat were about to be decided. At this moment, Hu Lin was full of confidence. Xian Honghai was also full of fighting spirit and confidence. For him to be able to rise to the rank of division commander in one step, he knew that there was more or less an element of luck involved. However, if he wanted to keep his position, then he had to have a sufficiently dazzling performance, and today's battle was undoubtedly the best opportunity for him to perform. Chapter 856. Before entering the battlefield, the commander and deputy commander had already talked to him. The Tatar cavalry had already experienced the power of the tip of the arrow formation yesterday. No one would be willing to fall in the same place twice. Since they had rushed here today, they must have thought of a countermeasure. Therefore, this battle would not be easy to fight. However, on the battlefield, one could not retreat without fighting just because one was worried. This was not something a fierce general should do, and it was not the style of the mercenaries. Therefore, they still had to fight, and they had to be flexible. At worst, they could send both the heavy cavalry and the light cavalry. This was also the reason why another light cavalry regiment was added today. Compared to other cavalry, the light cavalry was faster and more flexible. Once the opponent's tactics changed, they could enter the battlefield as the fastest and most flexible unit and change the situation. With such a backup plan, Xian Honghai was full of confidence. When he arrived at the battlefield, he saw that the distance between the two sides was less than 3 miles. It was time for the cavalry to charge. He shouted, "Blow the bugle and charge forward with the tip of the arrow formation." Toot 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 toot. When the bugle sounded, the 6,900 cavalry moved. They were divided into nearly 300 groups, and charged toward the Tatar cavalry from different directions. Shoot the arrows. Leave 2,000 cavalry in the middle. 4,000 men on the left and right flanks to avoid the attack of the enemy's main cavalry. At the same time, General Helan also gave the order. It was transmitted to the battlefield through the sound of the war drums. The 10,000 Tatar cavalrymen that were originally concentrated in the center of the formation suddenly separated before the mercenaries arrived. Only 2 formations of 2,000 cavalrymen were left in the middle. Then, arrows rained down from the left and right, forming a blockade, blocking the mercenaries' path in front and their path in the middle. Sure enough, the enemy had changed their tactics. Xian Honghai, who was charging forward on his horse, saw this. Seeing the arrows blocking the road ahead, he knew that something was wrong. At the same time, he quickly thought of all kinds of countermeasures. A sentence that Yang Chendong had once said flashed through his mind. Remember, on the battlefield, sometimes breaking one finger is far more painful than injuring all 10. With the voice still lingering in his ears, Xian Honghai immediately made a decision. Leave the frontal charge to the direct cavalry regiment and the 3 recruit battalions. All cavalry of the independent regiment, follow me to attack the enemy on the right. Heavy cavalry regiment, attack the enemy on the left. Light cavalry, cooperate with us. Use bows and arrows to assist in long-range attacks. Now that his opponent knew about his trump card, Xian Honghai knew that his previous methods would not work. In order to maximize his power and obtain victory, Xian Honghai used all the power he had at his disposal at once. As a result, Xian Honghai would have no soldiers at his disposal. If the enemy had any backup plans, he would need the support of the army commander. However, he still didn't regret it and made the decision decisively. On the battlefield, because of Commander Xian's shouts and orders, the horn-bearers at his side hurriedly blew several different bugles. On the battlefield, the situation changed in an instant. The various regiments began to methodically choose their opponents. Tiger's Mane and Shibi also heard the meaning of the bugles. After the 2 looked at each other, Tiger's Mane lightly nodded. Shibi then shouted, "Recruit division and Tatar division, prepare for battle." Xian Honghai immediately used up all the soldiers he could use. As their superior, he naturally had to prepare for a rainy day. Otherwise, if the Tatar cavalry sent out reinforcements, they would really be forced into a passive position. On the battlefield, following Xian Honghai's tactical adjustments, the formation of nearly 300 arrow tips suddenly changed directions, directly charging towards the enemy cavalry on the left and the front. Only the 4,000 Tatar cavalry on the right were left. When the enemy general Hu Lin saw this scene, he unconsciously narrowed his eyes, a smile appearing on his face. He had 4,000 fresh troops at his side, so he could support the 2 sides of the battlefield at any time. This was equivalent to grasping the initiative. As a result, he was already in an invincible position. Only this type of smile didn't last for long. Then, a wave of earth-shaking noises sounded. A group of heavily armored cavalry holding 3-meter-long blades suddenly appeared before everyone's eyes. Unlike the other mercenaries who were dressed in military green clothes, this cavalry was completely wrapped in battle armor. Every single one of them wore black battle robes, a black feather sticking out of their iron helmets, making them appear even more heroic and extraordinary. With 3-meter-long blades in front of them, the cavalry dressed in heavy battle armor immediately drew the attention of tens of thousands of people as soon as they appeared. They were precisely the new army's heavy cavalry regiment. The heavy cavalry regiment, as the name suggested, belonged to the tanks of the cavalry. Not to mention the threat of the 3-meter-long sabers in their hands, just the heavy armor on their body was not something that could be pierced through by ordinary weapons, nor could it be cut through. Their appearance was like a torrent of steel, giving off a feeling of invincibility and invincibility. Yang Chendong's telegram had arrived 2 days ago. In half a month to 20 days, the battle with the Mongols would begin. If they could not deal with the Tatar cavalry here, they would not be able to participate in that battle. For the 2 generals, this was something that they could not accept. Chapter 857. Not only would they fail to take down Tala City, but they would also fail to live up to the 6th young master's trust in them. Just as the two commanders were looking at each other speechlessly, the sound of the curtain being lifted sounded outside the tent. Then Beta Persei, with the rank of senior colonel, strode in and entered the sight of the two commanders. Beta Persei. Brother Beta Persei. The former was called out by Tiger's Mane, while the latter was called out by Shepherd. Beta Persei, who was called out, smiled and greeted the two. On the orders of the young master, I'm here to deliver the reward for the Tatar division. Haha, I haven't been idle along the way. You have to prepare some delicious food for me later. Young heir did not treat himself as an outsider. He found himself a chair and sat down. He even poured himself a cup of hot tea. He raised his head and gulped it down like a whale drinking a cow. It wasn't until he drank 3 cups of tea in a row that he felt his thirst being quenched. Then Beta Persei noticed that Tiger's Mane and Shepherd seemed to be a little absent-minded, and their moods were not quite right. What's wrong with the two of you? Don't tell me they lost the battle? As soon as he finished speaking, Beta Persei immediately denied it. Although he had just arrived, he heard the soldiers in the barracks celebrating and congratulating them from time to time. It didn't seem like they had lost the battle. We didn't lose the battle, but I'm afraid the next battle won't be easy. Tiger's Mane shook his head, then looked at Shepherd and said, Deputy Commander, tell your brother Beta Persei about our situation. Yes, Commander. Although Shepherd was promoted, he still had the rank of Colonel, which was 2 bars and 3 stars. Speaking of which, this was not in line with his current position, but there was no other way. He had only joined the mercenary group for a short period of time. This arrangement was also Yang Chendong's intention to remind him not to do something that he would regret if he got too proud of himself because of his quick promotion. Even if there was no comparison of military ranks, how many people in the entire Yangxia could stand shoulder to shoulder with Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei? She was very clear about her identity. She immediately reported to Beta Persei the various situations they might encounter next. Beta Persei sat and listened quietly. Over the years, he had been by the side of the 6th young master. He had more or less learned what it meant to be calm and steady. He also knew that without investigation, he had no right to speak. Shepherd's analysis of the situation in front of him was very clear. He quickly summarized the situation, and then closed his mouth. He knew that his act was over. Since the commander asked him to say this, he must have his own plans. Thus, just as Shepherd closed his mouth, Tiger's Mane finished. Beta Persei, the young master is about to launch an attack on the grassland tribes of the North Desert. I know that Fan Yuhai. He's a very cunning person and not easy to deal with. Now that the 3 divisions of the Cold Front Division have gone to the north, won't we be lacking confidence without a new army to deal with these people? Besides, this is also a chance for the new army to make a name for themselves. I definitely won't let it go. How about it? Help me. Help you? How can I help you? Beta Persei knew that nothing good would come out of this. If it was someone else who said this, he would probably get up and leave without asking. He was someone by the side of the 6th young master. He had no right to worry about the affairs of other troops. But this was Hu Mang, so there was nothing he could do. Who asked him to be promoted by him in the first place? Even now, if he wanted to beat him up, he wouldn't even be able to return the favor. Tiger's Mane's face first showed a trace of awkwardness, but then became much more determined. Beta Persei, how about this? How about you give me some ammunition from the logistics team? Also, give me a few more boxes of cannonballs. Don't tell me you don't have it. Although I'm not in charge of logistics, I more or less know some things there. That won't do. Beta Persei immediately waved his hand after hearing this. Tiger's Mane, I won't hide it from you. There are indeed ammunition and cannonballs in the logistics warehouse, but you should also know that the distribution of these things must be done by the young master. I don't have the authority to use them. Otherwise, I'm afraid that if I make a move, I'll be kicked back to the army. Then, I'll have to return to the young master's side. If that's the case, you might as well just kill me. Beta Persei was also a hoodlum. He directly spread out his hands and said that this road was blocked. This caused Hu Mang, who had been holding on to hope, to immediately relax. He looked like a balloon that had been punctured. He originally knew that he couldn't hide this matter from the young master. Moreover, he had a feeling that if he asked for it, there would most likely be no results. What? I let you be the commander of a new army. Can't you play without firearms? If that's the case, then it's easy to handle. You can come down. If you can't, then there's someone who can. Tiger's Mane wasn't that greedy for power. In the past, he was just a little boy beside Yang Qindong. He was very satisfied with everything he had now. However, he was afraid that he would fail the young master. He didn't want others to say that the young master didn't have enough strength. That was something he couldn't accept. Tiger's Mane's spirit seemed to have been drained at this moment. Seeing this, Shibi shouted in surprise, "Commander, are you okay?" "I'm fine. I just feel too much pressure and a little too tired." Tiger's Mane waved his hand and pulled himself together again. But now, the Tatar cavalry was obviously afraid of him. He was afraid that they wouldn't come out so casually. If they stayed in the city and didn't come out, what should he do? Without the help of firearms, would he be able to lead the cavalry to attack the city like infantry? Wouldn't that be playing to his strengths and avoiding his weaknesses? Wouldn't that be asking for trouble? Beta Persei saw Tiger's Mane's worried expression and couldn't help but sigh in his heart. As a good brother, of course, he couldn't watch him really fall here. He could only say, Okay, Tiger's Mane, I'm convinced. But without the young master's approval, I really can't give you the ammunition. But I have another way." When he heard that the gunpowder couldn't be given to him, Tiger's Mane's hope was about to be shattered. But when he heard the second half of the sentence, he immediately became spirited again. "Oh, what's the way? Tell me quickly." "I can say it, but I'm addicted to smoking. Don't tell me that I came here to drink 2 cups of hot tea to send me off." Beta Persei didn't answer immediately. Instead, he deliberately kept Tiger's Mane in suspense. As soon as he finished speaking, a box of freshly opened God of War cigarettes was handed to him. "How about this? I'll give you this pack. If it's not enough, I have 2 spares. I'll give them to you later." "Hee, Tiger's Mane, you said it yourself. Then I won't be polite." Beta Persei had a sinister smile on his face. "Of course, as long as you can give me a good idea, it's not a problem. By the way, can you tell me about your idea now?" Tiger's Mane didn't care about 2 packs of cigarettes. He knew that Beta Persei didn't care either. As the chief logistics officer, if he said that he was short of cigarettes, he wouldn't believe it even if he was beaten to death. This was just a joke between brothers. When it came to business, Beta Persei also put away his original frivolous appearance. After a short silence, he became serious and said, "Tiger's Mane, a batch of new supplies from the sea has just arrived. They were shipped from New Orgon City Head. But can you guess who else came with them? Tell me quickly, don't test my patience." Seeing that Beta Persei still wanted to tease him, Tiger's Mane pretended to pull a long face and said, Okay, I won't keep you in suspense. This time, Colonel Tianyu is also accompanying them." Beta Persei finally revealed the mystery. It's just that when he answered, Tiger's Mane and Shibi both had a blank look on their faces. They didn't seem to understand who this Colonel Tianyu was. But after all, Tiger's Mane was Tiger's Mane. After following Yang Qindong for many years, he was very familiar with some of the important people in Yangxia. Soon he found the relevant information in his mind. Tianyu was one of the earliest Cold Front soldiers, and one of the first students trained by Yang Qindong. After graduation, he didn't enter the army or the navy. Instead, he formed a new Eagle Division and was appointed as the captain. When the first Shang dynasty was defeated, the Eagle Division made its debut. They flew high in the sky and guided the army in the direction of attack. For a time, the enemy was confused and disoriented. They made the trench line that the enemy had been preparing for half a year collapse and made a great contribution. "I remember this person, Tianyu," Tiger's Mane exclaimed, but soon quieted down. "But he's the leader of the Eagle Regiment. The original Eagle Division was expanded into a regiment. What kind of help will he provide to our new army in taking down Tulu City?" "Hee, you'll have to ask him yourself," Beta Persei said. He had already done his duty as a brother by mentioning these things. As for what to do specifically, it was a problem that Tiger's Mane needed to think about. Beta Persei didn't say anything, so Tiger's Mane didn't ask anymore. Instead, he made up his mind. After rewarding the 3 armies, he would go back to the first city with him. He wanted to personally find Tianyu and see what kind of mystery was behind this. As for the Tatar cavalry in Tulu City, after losing 2 battles in a row, they really gave up the idea of going out of the city to fight the mercenaries. He focused his attention on the matter of attacking Xianfu City behind him. Xianfu City's walls were high and strong. It was indeed not that easy to attack. General Chiga, who was ordered to attack the city, had already attacked the city more than 10 times. He had lost a lot of soldiers but still couldn't take down the city. What was even more regrettable was that the Tatar cavalry could have bypassed Xianfu City and went to the northern hinterland of Baiming. However, they were always afraid that the Baiming army would cut off their escape route, so they couldn't do it. But now, after losing 2 battles to the mercenaries, they had to arrange for an army to defend the city. They wanted to send troops into Baiming, but they didn't have enough soldiers. This idea had to be put away. Attack, send 10,000 soldiers to General Chiga. Tell him that he must take down Xianfu City, no matter what. Feeling that time was tight, Hu Bo once again made up his mind. Chapter 858. As soon as the order was given, Mu Run and the other 2 generals quickly tried to dissuade him. If they sent out 10,000 soldiers, they would only have 20,000 cavalry left. If they faced the new army, they would not have the advantage in numbers and the situation would be even worse. Alright, you guys don't need to persuade me anymore. I've made up my mind. Instead of staying here and not knowing when the mercenaries will attack, it's better to send them to Xianfu City. Once we capture that city, Baiming will be able to defend Wujian City, and we can go straight in and plunder. Hu Bo mercilessly interrupted the 3 generals' persuasion. Seeing this, the 3 generals did not say anything. They only hoped that the mercenaries would not attack the city, and that Xianfu City would be taken down as soon as possible. While Hu Bo was making this decision, Tiger's Mane followed Beta Persei back to Origin City. After entering the city, Tiger's Mane went to find Commander Tianyu. He wanted to see what Beta Persei had planned for him. In the largest guest house in Origin City, the regiment commander of Tianyu was discussing something with a group of subordinates in a small war room. Suddenly, a soldier came to report that the commander of the new army had come and asked to see him. The commander of the new army was Tiger's Mane. This was already announced on the military's appointment board, so Tianyu naturally knew about it. When he heard that the popular person beside the 6th young master was looking for him, he did not dare to delay. He immediately let everyone discuss freely and hurriedly walked out of the room. When he entered the room, he saw Tiger's Mane standing there with his hands behind his back. Tianyu greets Commander Tiger. Seeing the other parties shining golden epaulets, Tianyu immediately gave a standard military salute and stood at attention. Hearing the voice, Tiger's Mane turned around and showed a kind smile to Tianyu, who was wearing a blue military uniform. Commander Tian, there's no need to be restrained. I'm here this time to ask you something. I don't know what Commander Tiger wants to tell me. Tianyu smiled. Speaking of which, they were old acquaintances. It was just that they hadn't seen each other much recently, so they hadn't contacted each other much. Leader Tian, I won't beat around the bush. Since you've suddenly appeared in Beginning City, you must have a mission. However, I wonder if you can tell me about it. Tiger's Mane had a smile on his face. Logically speaking, he was no longer one of the young master's people. The latter could choose to tell him or not. So his attitude was one of discussion and not an order. Of course. Whatever commander who wants to know, feel free to ask. This Tian will tell you everything he knows. Tianyu nodded. In the face of this person who had taken Lung Song's place and become the first major general in the army, he didn't dare to keep him in suspense. Who didn't know the relationship between Tiger's Mane and the 6th young master? Who would know when he would step down from his position as the new army commander and return to the 6th young master's side and become a popular person? Okay, then I'll be polite. Let me ask you. In the following time, Tiger's Mane and Tianyu had a conversation in the room for half an hour. Then the two of them came out together and went straight to the Yang mansion in the city from the guest house. Yang Chendong saw these two trusted subordinates in the small courtyard. The moment they appeared together, Yang Chendong guessed their intentions. Then his gaze swept over Beta Persei, who was standing at the side. After this gaze, Beta Persei's expression became a little unnatural. Of course, he knew what the young master meant. He decided that no matter what the outcome was, when there was no one around, he would apologize. "Since you're here, take a seat." Yang Chendong pointed at the two stone chairs in front of him and said casually. Since the young master gave an order, they didn't dare to disobey. Tiger's Mane and Tianyu each found a chair and sat down. Then the two of them looked at each other. It was Tianyu who spoke first. "Sixth young master, you said that you want to train the Air Force's combat ability here, but this subordinate thinks that since it's training, it's better to use actual combat as a starting point. Right now the new army in Talis City is attacking the city. Perhaps our Eagle Regiment can cooperate." "Oh, you want to go to Talis City? Is this your idea? Or did someone force you to do this?" Yang Chendong's expression didn't change, but his voice carried a hint of pressure. It was this faint pressure that made Tianyu stand up from his chair in shock. "Sixth young master, this is the subordinate's idea." Before Tianyu could continue, Tiger's Mane had already stood up. He knew that the sixth young master had already seen through everything. If he didn't stand up at this time, he was afraid that he would really attract the young master's anger. "It's just that Commander Tian also wants to use this opportunity to train the troops. We think this is a good opportunity for cooperation. Yes, our Eagle Regiment also wants to use the opportunity of actual combat to strengthen ourselves. At the same time, we can better see where our problems lie," Tianyu also said. This was originally something that the two of them had discussed. This way, they could prevent the sixth young master from venting his anger on one person. Little Lu Zhong fell into a short silence. Yang Chendong didn't immediately voice his opinion. Instead, he looked at Beta Persei, who was beside him. Immediately, the sound of someone kneeling on the ground rang out. Beta Persei knelt on the ground and said, "Young master, I was the one who told Tiger's Mane that Commander Tian had arrived at the beginning city. Young master, please punish me." "Young master." Seeing that Beta Persei was about to kneel on the ground, Tiger's Mane was shocked and wanted to kneel on the ground as well. At this moment, Yang Chendong spoke. "All right, how many times have I said it? Don't kneel so easily. A man has gold under his knees, don't you understand?" As soon as he said this, Tiger's Mane's knees went soft and hard. He almost fell down. At this moment, he didn't know what to do. Fortunately, Yang Chendong's voice followed. "Since Commander Tian thinks that it is more necessary to combine actual combat, then go ahead and do it. But I'll say the ugly words first. It's fine if the Eagle Regiment doesn't come out, but once they do, they must hit the target. You guys can do as you see fit. Beta Persei, whatever Commander Tian needs, you can arrange to give him as much as possible." Waving his hand lightly, Yang Chendong didn't look at Tiger's Mane, who was standing there. This kind of behavior showed that he was dissatisfied with Tiger's Mane's action first and report later. Although as the commander of the new army, Hu Meng's actions were public and not private, but he didn't report to them immediately after entering the beginning city. Instead, he looked for Tianyu first. This was a mistake in itself. Tiger's Mane saw that the young master was displeased, but he didn't say anything. His idea was that any apology was not as good as winning a big battle for the young master to see. It could also express his apology and sincerity. Beta Persei and the other two left the Yang residence's courtyard. It wasn't until they left that he let out a long sigh of relief. Then he looked at Tiger's Mane and said, "Tiger's Mane, this is the only time. I won't dare to do it again next time." You also saw the young master's dissatisfaction. Yes, I appreciate Brother Beta Persei's kindness. But you have to promise me that you will take more crude oil with us later. You can't be stingy. Tiger's Mane had a perfunctory look, but when it came to serious matters, he still didn't give an inch. "Okay, I really owe you." Beta Persei shook his head helplessly. The person who came was Tiger's Mane. For this elder brother, even if he was scolded, he would accept it. After only 3 hours, Tiger's Mane, Tianyu, and the others left the beginning city with a few carriages. Yang Chendong didn't say anything after hearing the news from Yang Si. He only thought in his heart that he had given enough opportunities and pressure. He hoped that the new army could have a better performance. Compared to others, he was more interested in Tiger's Mane. He even wanted to train him to be independent, hoping that his painstaking efforts would not be in vain. In the barracks of the new army, an unfamiliar team of hundreds of people suddenly came. Because they were personally led by the commander, they were not interrogated at all. As soon as they entered the barracks, they were secretly protected. Outsiders didn't know what these people were doing. In the main tent, Tianyu followed behind Tiger's Mane and entered. Here, he and the deputy commander saluted each other, and the three of them sat down under a small sand table. Commander Tian, this time it depends on your performance, but I don't know when you will be ready. Tiger's Mane was an impatient person. After sitting down, he brought up the business. It mainly depends on the direction of the wind. Right now, we are relying on the heavens to eat. Tianyu also wanted to quickly solve the war here, but there were some things that he couldn't decide. Okay, then send someone to watch. Once the time is right, immediately inform me and the deputy commander. We will be ready. Tiger's Mane more or less knew a little about the Eagle Regiment. He knew that the other party was not being perfunctory. All he could do was pray that the heavens would give him an opportunity as soon as possible. On the other hand, Shibi looked at the two of them talking as if he was watching a show. He had a completely ignorant look on his face. It was only when the opportunity presented itself that he realized why Hu Meng would attach so much importance to a mere colonel regiment commander. Tianyu said to wait for an opportunity, and this wait lasted for 4 days. It wasn't until the evening of the 4th day that Tianyu arrived at the main tent. Tiger's Mane anxiously went up to him. This time, without waiting for him to ask, Tianyu had already opened his mouth and said, "The opportunity has come. It will be tomorrow morning. We will immediately go and prepare. Your new army should also prepare." Okay. Tiger's Mane nodded heavily. He turned to look at Shibi and said, "Deputy Commander, summon the officers for a meeting." The next day, the sun was high up in the sky. In the morning, the soldiers of the new army ate early. They put on their battle clothes, mounted their war horses, and held their sabers in their hands. They were divided into battalions and stood in formation. The movements of the mercenaries were quickly discovered by the Tatar cavalry on the city wall. This situation was immediately reported to General Hu Bo. Soon after, a group of generals hurried up the city wall. From afar, the mercenaries' formation was neat and orderly, their weapons ready for battle. What's going on? Could it be that they want to attack the city at all costs? General Hu Lin's face was filled with shock as he spoke. Chapter 859. If they just charge head-on, their losses will be great. I'm sure they haven't thought of this. Gore also had a confused look on his face, and as he spoke he glanced at Hu Bo. What did General Murun say? Hu Bo did not reply immediately. After several bloody battles, he knew that the mercenaries were not to be trifled with. He also knew that among his subordinates, Murun was the one who understood the enemy the most. His words were always taken seriously. Murun narrowed his eyes slightly, and he was also puzzled. Since the general asked, he replied, "From the looks of it, they're really going to attack the city? Could it be that they've thought of something else? Or do they have enough firearms?" It was no wonder that Murun would say this. Although the mercenaries' cavalry was strong, attacking a city wasn't a battle formation. The effectiveness of cavalry was still very limited. As long as one's head wasn't kicked by a donkey, they would definitely not use cavalry to attack a city. There was only one other reason. They had prepared enough firearms. Whether it was cannons or long-range muskets, they could put a lot of pressure on the Tatar army. When he heard that the enemy might use firearms to attack the city, Hu Bo's face turned ugly. Previously, the enemy had only used 2 cannons to blast open the city gates, giving them a fright. Fortunately, the facts told them that such powerful firearms were rare in the new army. Only then did they manage to suppress their anxiety. But now, it seemed like the other party was prepared. If that was the case, they really didn't know how to deal with the invisible cannons that could deal great damage to them. Pass down the order. All soldiers prepare for battle. All archers prepare for battle. Huboer's face turned red. Before he knew what the mercenaries were going to do, it was better to be prepared. In Tulu, the Tatar cavalry was also ready for battle. Even when they were ready, the mercenaries still hadn't started their attack. They just slowly arrived 2 miles away from the city and waited in formation. What are they going to do? Huboer stood behind one of the battlements on the city wall and looked at the new army. Her face was filled with confusion. Even if the enemy had firearms to clear the way, they would still have to pay a heavy price to take down Tulu City, which was already prepared. The enemy's generals knew this, but they still put on such a front. What exactly were they relying on? In fact, it wasn't just the Tatar army that was puzzled. Even the soldiers of the new army were puzzled. They did not understand why the army would set up such a formation. Could it be that they wanted to attack the city? It was not that they could not use cavalry as infantry, but it was a huge waste. Most importantly, they would suffer heavy losses. The new army only had a limited number of people compared to the Tatar army. With such losses, it was hard to say if they could take down the city, paying such a heavy price for something they did not know if they could succeed. It was no wonder that the soldiers were grumbling. At 10 o'clock in the morning, poise had reached level 3. Many of the soldiers had become numb. They had been standing here for more than 2 hours, but there was no order to attack the city. This made the soldiers who were originally worried couldn't help but relax a little. There were even some who thought that they were smart. They thought that this was just a training exercise to put pressure on the Tatar army. In reality, there was no intention to fight. This thought grew stronger and stronger in the hearts of the soldiers. Everyone thought that this was a show of strength to put more pressure on the enemy. At this time, most of the soldiers were thinking about what to eat for lunch. Suddenly, a very surprised voice sounded in the army. Heavens, look, what is that in the sky? There are people on it. This shout was like a boulder being thrown into a calm lake. Immediately, layers of waves were set off. When everyone heard this shout, they could not help but look up at the sky. Then 10 huge hot air balloons appeared above their heads. They moved with the wind and slowly moved forward. Looking at the direction they were heading, it was Tulu City. Is this a divine object? This must be Tingri's spirit. In the new army, there were many Mongolian soldiers who immediately got down from their horses and knelt on the ground when they saw this unimaginable scene. They shouted in their own language and kowtowed while tears flowed down their cheeks. The vice commander also looked up and saw this scene. Then, out of instinct, he prepared to get off his horse and kneel to pray. After all, he was born and raised here. Although he was already a high-ranking mercenary general, some things in his bones would not be easily changed. At this time, Tiger's Mane, who was riding on the horse beside him, reached out and pressed on his shoulder. He gently shook his head. "Commander, what are you doing? Can't you see that this is Tingri's spirit?" His face was a little emotional and also a little red. This was because he felt that Tiger's Mane's big hand was very strong. It actually made him feel like he could not move. "Vice Commander, don't be emotional. Calm down. What if I say that this is not Tingri's spirit? Look carefully. Is there a 5-starred flag on it?" Tiger's Mane's expression was normal, but the strength of his hand did not decrease. What? This scared Shibi. He did not know what was going on. Then he tried to look at the sky. He found that the sun was shining, so he could not see clearly. He simply took the telescope hanging on his neck and looked at it. When he saw it, his face turned pale and his body trembled. If it were not for Tiger's Mane's help, he would have fallen off his horse. How is this possible? Why is there our 5-starred flag on it? Shibi was puzzled. His face was full of doubt, but more than that, there was fear. Could it be that the 6th young master was really Tingri's messenger? That he appeared in the grasslands under Tingri's orders to save this place and unify it? Sigh. Tiger's Mane sighed. Shibi was very smart and very wise. This was something that even the 6th young master had praised. But in the end, humans were still humans. Their reaction to the unknown was no different from that of ordinary people. Tiger's Mane could indeed say that this was the manifestation of God. This way, the morale of the soldiers below would definitely reach its peak. But Shibi was not an ordinary soldier. There were some things that could not be hidden from him. It was time to tell him the truth. Deputy Commander, this is not a miracle. It is an aerial unit sent by the god of war. Their appearance here is not a manifestation of God. They are here to help us attack Tulu City. Tiger's Mane finally told the truth. However, the truth was simply too inconceivable. Even someone as intelligent as Shibi was still unable to comprehend it. His eyes widened. Then, as he digested the information, he said with a shocked expression, "Commander, are you saying that all of this is the arrangement of the sixth young master? The sixth young master can make people fly?" "Yes, you can say that. As long as they follow what the sixth young master taught them and borrow the power of other objects, they can fly." Tiger's Mane sighed heavily. Then, his face was full of admiration. This was their young master, their master. Anything he did was so earth-shattering. It was unprecedented. Shibi still did not believe it, but since Tiger's Mane said it so formally, he had no reason to not believe it. Most importantly, with the help of the binoculars, he could faintly see the figures of soldiers in military uniforms on the hot air balloons. The only difference between them and himself was that they were not military green but sky blue. Could this really be the arrangement of the sixth young master? Could he really make people fly? Even though Shibi worshipped the sixth young master, and believed him to be the most capable person in history, there was nothing he didn't know and nothing he didn't know. But looking at the scene in the sky, he had to admit that he had underestimated the sixth young master. He had underestimated the god of war. Shibi, who knew the general reason, did not kneel on the ground with the other grassland warriors and call out to God. But the other warriors were already boiling. They all knelt on the ground and kept praying. They spoke of their respect and worship for God. Some people even took this opportunity to express the wishes that they had buried in their hearts. Most of the warriors got off their horses and knelt on the ground. At the back of the army, Wuxia was leading a group of teachers and students from the Yang Family Academy. Now, it should be said that the teachers and students of the First City Academy were watching this scene from afar. It was also Wuxia's first time seeing a hot air balloon rise into the sky. It was impossible for him not to be excited. It was just that he had already talked about the relevant knowledge during his teaching, so this excitement was quickly suppressed. He had already confirmed one thing, and that was that the things taught by the sixth young master were not unrealistic in the eyes of others. Instead, they could be put into practice after hard work. Think about it. If even people could be sent into the sky, what else could not be done? What else could not come true? All of you take a good look. Don't always say in class that the things recorded in the book are not true, and that some records can't be realized at all. Now what else do you have to say? Taking this opportunity, the first deputy dean, Wuxia, looked at everyone as if they were frogs at the bottom of a well. This time, no one objected to Wuxia's words. The truth was right in front of them. What else was there to say? If people could fly into the sky, what else couldn't they do? Dean, we were wrong. Our understanding was wrong. We were too short-sighted. We will definitely study hard when we return to the academy in the future. Chapter 860. Principal, don't worry. After today's eye-opening experience, we'll work even harder and try to make the things recorded in the books into reality. Right, Principal, we were wrong. Wuxia nodded his head in satisfaction as the voices of people admitting their mistakes rang in his ears. He knew that after today's events, it would be easier to lead the academy's teams. He was even more curious as to where Yang Chendong had learned all this. For a person to be able to fly into the sky, this was something that he would never have dared to think about in the past. The mercenaries were shaken, and the soldiers all knelt on the ground. In Tulu City, the situation seemed to be replicated. After seeing the large balloons in the sky, the Tatar cavalry knelt on the ground, as did the master archers who had been lying in ambush. Even Hubo and the other generals knelt on the ground. Even though they were generals, They had not received any education and were illiterate. In the face of technology that had only been created a few hundred years later, their resistance was no different from ordinary soldiers. Even though these large balloons were floating over their heads, no one thought of doing anything to them. On the contrary, they constantly kowtowed and prayed, as if their words would reach the ears of the gods and become reality in the near future. Xuanfu City. After fighting bitterly for more than 10 days and nights, Commander Sherwanshan's eyes were bloodshot. Giving up Tulu City and retreating to Xuanfu had put him under great pressure. It was said that the Beiming imperial court had sent him memorials as tall as a small mountain, and there were even people who requested for him to be replaced, so that he could be brought back to the capital for trial. Fortunately, eunuch Deng Chong had stood firmly on his side at the crucial moment. In addition, the connections he had built up over the years had also played a role. In the end, he submitted a memorial stating that he could not only ensure Xuanfu City's safety within a month, but also take back Tulu City. Only then did the pressure lessen. However, only he knew how helpless he had been when he submitted that memorial. Although it seemed like the Duke of Loyalty's promise to him, through Yu Can's words, he could not let go of this unknown minor character, betting his life and future on a minor character he had met for the first time. Even Sherwanshan found it too laughable when he thought about it. His actions back then had been too bold. Fortunately, this Yu Can had always been by his side. Even after following him to Xian Manor, he was very cooperative and stayed in the small courtyard arranged by him. It was just that during the day, when he went out on the streets and strolled around, he was not afraid of the northern Ming soldiers secretly following behind him. You cannot escape. This was the only thing that comforted Sherwanshan. Originally, he thought that there was still some time before the 1-month deadline, and that Yu Can's life and death would be revealed. However, he never thought that this person would actually take the initiative to meet him this morning. Sherwanshan was very curious about Yu Can's request to see him. In the small courtyard, he met this average-looking young man who was always very calm. In the small courtyard, the moment the two sides met, Yu Can said something that shocked Sherwanshan. "Commander, today is the day for you to launch a large-scale counterattack and take back Hela City." Yu Can had appeared in front of him a total of 3 times. The first time, he had passed on the Duke of Loyalty's words and asked him to withdraw from Talu City. The second time, he had followed him to Xuanfu City without waiting for his orders. And now, this was the 3rd time they had met, but his words had also shocked Sherwanshan. "Sir Yu, what do you mean?" Although Sherwanshan believed that he had the demeanor of a great general and was calm in the face of trouble, he had to admit that he was more shocked than the last when he met Yu Can. "That's what I meant just now. Today, Talu City will undergo a great change. I'm afraid that it won't be long before Hubo sends the order to withdraw the troops. The time could be tonight or tomorrow morning. Commander, you just need to make your preparations." Yu Can's expression remained the same, as if he was talking about an extremely ordinary matter. He said these words word by word from his mouth. The more calm Yu Can was, the more shocked Sherwanshan was. Last time, he had come at the besieged Talu City on the orders of the Duke of Loyalty. This time, Xuanfu City was also tightly surrounded, and no information could be casually leaked out. And now, this person had sent the Duke of Loyalty's orders. Sherwanshan couldn't help but be suspicious. "Mr. Yu, where did you get this information from? Is it accurate?" Sherwanshan asked in a probing manner. He was simply too curious about this person's ability to know about the world without leaving the city. This information came from the Duke of Loyalty, so it can't be false. As for the source of the information, I'm sorry, but I can't tell you without orders. All right, the information has been sent. Commander, please make your preparations. After dinner, I will come to the barracks. If the situation in the barracks is still the same by tomorrow morning, I will present myself to the higher-ups. Commander, you don't need to worry about it. Yu Can's face was calm, as if he had already disregarded life and death. After saying this, he turned around and left. He didn't give anyone a chance to ask him any questions. He only left Sherwanshan with a thoughtful and mysterious back view. If one said that Yu Can was spouting nonsense, then he had taken out his own head as a guarantee. But if one said that he was always accurate, then where did the information come from? Shi Wanchang couldn't figure it out. After a long time, he shook his head and said to the bodyguards outside the courtyard, "Quick, go call Eunuch Deng, General Gu, and General Ning to the residence." Above Tulu City's skies, the 10 hot air balloons already appeared one after another. They intentionally lowered their altitude, only 100 meters above, beyond the range of a bow's firing range. Then they began to toss down sealed wooden barrels that they had prepared beforehand. At a distance of more than 100 meters, some people with good eyesight could faintly see the scene above the balloons. They could see some people moving around, and they could even see the bright 5-star army flag fluttering in the wind. What's going on? Why do I seem to see the flag of the mercenaries? Yes, I seem to see it too. What? How is this possible? Heavens, don't tell me that even Longevity Heaven is loyal to the mercenaries. Ah. If that's the case, then we are going against the mercenaries. Aren't we disobeying? No one said the following words, but everyone knew what they wanted to say. Even the everlasting heaven wanted to hire mercenaries. If that was the case, wouldn't their actions be against the will of the heavens? The Tatar cavalrymen, who had no scientific knowledge, were feudal in their hearts, and believed in the gods, had already turned pale. The morale of the 20,000 soldiers was greatly shaken. Unknowingly, General Hubo had stood up. Obviously, he was suspicious of the balloons in the sky. He had heard about the gods from the old man. And in all kinds of legends, there were even stories of the gods manifesting themselves. However, there was no way to verify it. When he asked the people involved, the answers were ambiguous. It was impossible to not believe it, but also impossible to believe it completely. However, in all kinds of legends, he had never heard of a god transforming into a balloon. Now that he heard the soldiers say that there were people moving around on the balloons, and there were even flags of the mercenaries, he became even more suspicious. His first reaction was that this was a trick of the mercenaries. But how did they do it? How did they send such a big balloon up into the sky? This was not something that could be done by humans, right? The discussions of the soldiers did not try to avoid him, the great general. Many of the words were clearly heard by Hubo, and it was because of this that his expression became increasingly ugly. Their morale was shaken. If the mercenaries were to launch an attack now, how much combat power would they have left? Just as Hubo felt that the situation was not good, he felt a chill in his heart. There was finally some movement from the balloons, and they began to throw things down. Wooden barrels fell from the sky, heading towards Tulu City. Thump, 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 thump. Every time it fell, there would be a huge explosion. Then the barrel would explode, and a pool of crude oil would flow in the city. The air was filled with a pungent smell. Falling from a high altitude, the large balloon kept moving slowly. Every time it fell, the landing point of the wooden barrels would be different, causing the liquid in the barrels to spread everywhere. Some of them even landed on top of the soldiers' heads. If they hadn't reacted quickly enough, they would have been crushed to death by the impact. Although no one was hit, the liquid in the bucket inevitably splashed on their bodies. When the soldiers came into close contact with the liquid, some experienced and knowledgeable veterans immediately said, why does this smell like crude oil? This is crude oil. It has appeared in the grasslands before. This thing cannot be touched by fire, or else it will be impossible to put it out. Another older soldier said with certainty. What? Crude oil? Hubo's face suddenly turned frighteningly pale. He immediately thought of the words fire attack. Then he jumped up and shouted, Everyone stay away from the fire seed. You must not see fire in the city. You must not see fire. Hubo's reaction was quick, but unfortunately, in the face of the crude oil falling from the sky, his shout was not enough to stop the tragedy that followed. Especially when a wooden barrel fell beside the kitchen of the army, a huge fire suddenly rose. In just a short moment, the nearby area was dyed red. You're tuning in to the Limei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference. as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.